Good afternoon, members. That is the committee into public session. So, housekeeping first of all, I'd advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online, and I'd advise those in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted, and it's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. So, item 1 on the agenda is apologies. I don't have any apologies other than apologies for lateness from David. I think he may just be slightly delayed in joining, and David is joining online, as is John. So as normally the case with anyone joining online, should you have any issues with your audio or your connection at all, do just flag that with through the clerk and her team. Item 2 on the agenda then is chairperson's business. So there are a couple of items that are just tabled for you there in tabled papers that I wanted to draw your attention to at the start of the meeting. The first is the publication of a report from the Department of Health, which was the review into the population health needs of children with complex medical conditions attending special educational needs schools across Northern Ireland. So this is one that I think members will recall. We've had quite a number of discussions across committee around the role of nurses in special schools and concerns around quite substantial geographical variation depending on what trust area schools are in, whether or not nurses are still situated in special schools. And I can certainly speak locally in my area too, in the South Eastern Trust. Even within that trust area, there is a discrepancy in provision around some schools having the nurses in and others not. So it is just to really make sure that that is on members' radar and really to have a discussion as to whether or not we want to do anything with that. I think it can certainly be factored into our evidence for our SEN inquiry and this being an issue that requires clarity and a bit of clear direction from both health and education ministers in relation to our special schools. But I would like to propose, given the seriousness of the issue, given some of the evidence we've heard from principals around the importance of nurses in their special schools, that we would write to both the health and the education ministers, and I would want to note some concerns with that report, namely the lack of clarity that it brings. It does suggest there's a need for a more detailed review, but it's not really clear what the timescale for that is, what the real terms of reference of that would be, and a lack of a clear framework of how education and health would be working together on any future review. And I think crucially we're just left with schools in limbo, and really what is, particularly from the health minister's perspective, but education minister does feed into this in terms of what certainty can be provided to them if they have nurses in situ at the moment. Is there any possibility those will be withdrawn? For those with vacancies who are struggling to get approval through trust channels to recruit, is that going to change? So there's a lot of uncertainties, but I would just want to put on record, I think nurses are an absolutely vital provision in our special schools, and I think it feels like a missed opportunity that this review did not come out with clearer recommendations, and I'm just concerned we are kicking the can down the road. I know our special school principals and the parents of the children in those schools, and most importantly the children who rely on the care from those nurses, that really we have potentially missed an opportunity to provide much needed certainty and clarity for them. So I really just want to put it out there, if members are agreed, I'll bring Cathy in a sec certainly, that we do go ahead with that correspondence as suggested. But Cathy, I'll bring you.
Yeah, sure, I agree. I got my hands on a copy of it yesterday and I've went through it, and there's a hell of a lot of wait and sees in it, and in speaking to special school principals, they can't wait and see any longer. You mentioned a couple of cases that there is. I'm dealing with one that has had one that was on site and has now been removed. We know what the outworkings, or we know what has been tragedies out of that, not directly out of that, but a tragedy has occurred, and that principal has made it very, very clear that there's children's lives here, there's the parental concern. They're putting their children into school, expecting that they get a level of care. But for the staff as well, who are having to deal with this, they're not trained medical professionals. They are classroom assistants, they are teachers, and they are having to administer complex medical procedures. So I agree 100% that we need to pursue this. I am very disappointed. I think everybody was kind of waiting. We were told by both the health minister and the education minister to wait till this review comes out. It doesn't go far enough. There's no timescales on it. There's nothing really out of it. There's one thing I wanted to raise as well, though, that I find is very disappointing and a missed opportunity. The scope of the report, and it says within it that it doesn't examine the services provided to children by the wider multidisciplinary team. Now, this to me was a clear opportunity to do that. While this report was being done, why not go alongside? It actually says that it was commissioned by the Department of Health and the Minister for Education, so I can't for the life of me understand. We hear time and again how the Department of Health does not know how many allied health professionals are needed within our schools, not just our special schools, all of our schools now who have specialist provision within them. So I am so disappointed, not just in this report, but also that we've missed an opportunity here. We've heard again, time and again, around health and education working together. This seemed like a perfect time to do it, and it's been completely missed.
Absolutely agree, and I think we're all very wary of that culture that can sometimes emerge, that just the solution to all problems is a review. And I think we had a review that was promised, and I welcomed it at the time, and I know the special school principals welcomed it. They thought that clarity was coming, and for essentially the outcome of that review to be we need another review is disappointing. Mm-hmm. I do welcome, and I want to acknowledge, I don't want to downplay that the Health Minister and Education Minister did come together on this. They engaged with principals directly, and that is to be commended. But if the outworkings of that are not something tangible for schools, it does create a problem. Michelle, you had indicated there.
I can't believe we're still talking about this. I'm still completely and utterly shocked that this happened in the first place. Kathy's alluded to what happened in her area in one of the schools. The least you expect when you send your kids to school is that they're safe. If kids are turning up at school who have complex medical needs, they need a medical professional to administer that. The idea that a classroom assistant would be any kind of substitute for a medically trained nurse is absolutely bizarre. This seems very simple, and it's been overcomplicated by reviews and paperwork to delay making decisions. This decision is urgent, and I can't believe we're still talking about it. And I'm wondering, when do we get to the point where we actually need to we talk about health and education, the crossovers, especially in the area of SEN all the time, both of those ministers here to talk to us about this. And I really mean that, because this is completely serious. We talk about it every week. We get awful answers back from the correspondence that we send through. So there needs to come a point where both of these ministers come together and come to us and tell us, what are they doing? This issue, absolutely, this is critical, potentially life and death. But across the piece on SEN, it's just, and I think just abject failure of responsibility. So I just honestly, I feel really strongly about this. I can't believe we're still talking about it.
Thank you, Michelle. And look, I think there's possibly an idea to be picked up there that may bear some discussion at this stage. So in terms of correspondence, are we agreed? Actually, sorry, there's Cara's not in there. Apologies. I should have highlighted Cara is also online and had indicated. So before we go ahead, it should bring Cara in. Apologies, Cara. If you're able to connect, okay. We'll see. We can see if we can get Cara in. There we are. Yeah, there we are. Just waiting for audio, I assume. Yeah.
She mightn't have heard what we're discussing.
Cara, there we go.
Yep.
Yes. Sorry, Cara, were you looking to come in on this item, or was that just a notification that you were joining online? Like, what I maybe misunderstood from the clerk?
Just recently, my office had spoken with the Northern Ireland Rare Disease Partnership. I just wanted to highlight, I know we're digging a little deeper with our inquiry around special educational needs, and just if they could have the opportunity to engage with the committee at some point, whether it be a Tuesday morning meeting or come before the committee, just to make sure we're being as inclusive and, I suppose, as educated and aware as possible about rare diseases and how they impact learning.
Okay, no problem, Cara. I'll perhaps pick that up in matters arising, and we'll just dispose of the item that we're on at the moment, and I'll come straight back to you on that.
Thank you.
So in terms of the nursing provision, we do have a proposal that I'm happy to set out there that we do write to both health and education ministers, really looking at some more detail on what is now going to happen on the back of this report. I think particularly if there is going to be a further review, what are the timescales and what are the interim measures and supports that are going to be put in place. But I have to say, I think Michelle's proposal that perhaps for our next concurrent meeting with health, we need to be asking the ministers to attend. on this issue, but across the piece on that collaboration in the education system around SEN, around emotional health and well-being. There's a whole range of issues, and I think that would be time well spent. So it would be, I think, maybe for the clerk to reach out to the health committee in the first instance around that proposal, and we can go from there if members are agreed. So I think we're all agreed on that. The second item in chairperson's business also. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Apologies if I miss anything from anyone online. It can be tricky, just sometimes just picking up on that. So apologies. Second item in tabled papers there under chairperson's business is the joint statement that went out from the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People and the Children's Law Centre. It was a joint statement setting out that they have withdrawn from the task and finish group on restraint and seclusion, or restrictive practice, as it's perhaps more commonly referred to in our schools. I just have to set out, I think this is another deeply concerning development. We're really now completely unclear where this process sits, and I think for individuals like Deirdre Shakespeare, parents who've been absolutely, through horrendous processes to get this issue onto the public agenda and to get some redress for their situation, to still be waiting for that statutory guidance must be utterly demoralising for them. And I know it's the likes of Deirdre, but other parents who've been through that process as well. So there's probably not a huge amount we can do today other than to write to the department and seek an urgent update on how they are now going to progress this work. But I am concerned that there seems to be limited prospect of guidelines coming through, and we need an urgent update. And I would suggest if we don't get something helpful in writing, we should be having the officials in committee to discuss that. Deputy Chair,
Chair, I think this process has lost all legitimacy.
Absolutely.
I mean, we have 3 organisations, which are focused on children rights, protecting children and so on, and they pulled out of the process because of their perceived policy direction that's being promoted by the department, and it's clear that the department wants to retain Article 4 of the 98 Education Act, which allows for restrictive practices in cases of good order and discipline, rather than as a very last resort. And I mean, I don't know where it's going. I agree we should write to the department. I think the department have also, their standards seem to be dropping, because they were notified of the Children's Commissioner and the Children's Law Centre dropping out in the middle of August, and they didn't even write to them. That's just bad manners. But anyway,
it is really concerning, and I think it is just that sense, whatever the internal politics going on around this may be departmentally, that there are stakeholders across the sector, parents, children and teachers and school leaders, who desperately need this guidance to be delivered, and we really seem to be no clearer as to when, if indeed ever, it is going to be provided. Michelle?
I agree with everything that's been said. I just thought it was worth noting the first 2 items we've discussed here have been really serious safeguarding concerns for kids in our schools that are not being dealt with any kind of speed or urgency. And this has been knocking around now for years, and it needs to be dealt with. So I just wanted to flag that. It's just getting a concerning pattern that we talk about safeguarding all the time, and we have these issues come before us that nobody seems to want to actually deal with. And there are answers here. For this one in particular, there are solutions that were agreed previously by the previous minister, and we're not getting nothing done. And in the meantime, kids and people working in schools are not protected.
Absolutely, and look, I think I would certainly be taking the view, we wait to see what the written response coming back on this is, but I do not in any way want this to be perceived that seeking a letter to come back from the department is kicking this down the road. If we don't get something substantive, we'll bring the officials in to try and understand where this process actually sits, because we're in a scenario where the clock is ticking on this mandate, and we really do need this to be delivered.
And particularly, Chair, the fact that there has been guidelines rushed through on other issues in recent times.
Yeah, things can move quickly when there's the will, and that, I think that is Okay, I think there is agreement. I'm not hearing any dissenting voices on that, so we'll move on then from Chairperson's business to item 3, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations they wish to make on any items on the agenda today? No. Again, please indicate if that should change or anything arises. Apologies, yes, there was another item tabled, which is a record of, just to take us back, apologies, a record of the informal meeting with the autism reviewer, and also we had the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists and a representative from Middletown Centre for Autism yesterday morning, which was a really helpful session, which I think covered a lot of those issues around some of the discussions that committee has been sort of batting around prevalence of special educational needs, autism in particular at times. And there was a real push and a real emphasis from all of those expert witnesses who presented to members yesterday morning that we need to be really dealing with the issues in terms of how we support and look out for children in our system in the here and now, and that we need to make use of the window of time that we have really to be focused on a very, very child-centred approach to this. The recording is available for members, so for anyone who wasn't able to attend, I know the autism reviewer was really keen to get as much member engagement on this as possible, so I really would urge members to pick up on that recording and to reach out to the autism reviewer or any of the other witnesses if there's anything else arising from that. But I would want to draw members' attention to that, and apologies for that oversight from the tabled papers. Okay, item 4 is matters arising. So, Cara, you had mentioned around the rare diseases issue. Do you wanted to speak to that very briefly?
Yeah, just I'm mindful that we're doing the SEN inquiry and looking at how we can best serve children with different special educational needs. I know my office team have spoken with the NI Rare Disease Partnership, who just thought as part of that, maybe we could engage with them a little further, whether that would be a Tuesday morning meeting or perhaps coming before committee at some point. I'm mindful of our time, but I think it's important just we're on this topic, and it would be good to kind of hear from them and educate ourselves on rare disease as well.
Yeah, thank you, Cara. Look, I'm very happy to facilitate a briefing. I'm going to suggest it would be an informal briefing at this stage. Our time looking at forward work planning in terms of what we have to fit in between now and the recess at Christmas is pretty packed. But I do absolutely agree that would be a helpful organisation to hear from if members are agreed that we seek an informal briefing from them. We agreed? Agreed. Okay, that takes us on then to item 5, which is draft minutes. So I'd refer members to the draft minutes.
Sorry, just before you go on, I thought we were going to deal with some other issues. I wanted to comment first of all on the debate on the uniform bill on Monday, and I thought the attitude of the minister left a lot to be desired, and he made a particular comment about a Protestant school. And as we all know, there is no Protestant sector, and the minister, in my view, was deliberately trying to sectarianise an issue that had come in front of the committee, and was dealt with, in a way that committees should deal with issues. They scrutinised the issue carefully, and there was no sectarian motive behind the scrutiny that the committee carried out. Secondly, I have seen a letter sent by the Permanent Secretary of the Department to principals in anticipation of the Uniforms Bill passing its final stage. And it has just confirmed to me what we have thought all along, that this minister isn't serious about significantly bringing down costs of school uniforms. There's not going to be one bit of difference next year. And they sort of let the cat out of the bag. The minister at further consideration stage and David Brooks at final stage, that there are only a small minority of offenders, and yet the average cost of a post-primary uniform is 420 quid. And if it's only a small minority of offenders, the cost wouldn't be as high as that. There's no way that just a small minority of cases would inflate the figure to £420. So in any event, I know the committee, I wasn't here last week, but the committee agreed to scope out the possibility of a committee bill, and I'm just wondering, have we any report on that today?
Clark, just to speak to that first of all.
So we have just a bit of information really from the Bills office, and there isn't. I haven't got a formal pro forma from them yet, but yes, what was agreed last week was that the content of the former amendments would be the policy direction of a proposed committee bill, which would be an amendment bill to the bill, the uniforms bill that has just passed final stage on Monday. And the committee agreed that while waiting for sight of the guidelines. So the Bill's office have advised about likely timings and given a couple of comparator bills which have been carried out in a non-executive fashion. So obviously you have the private members bill process, which is for an individual member bringing legislation. Then when a committee or the commission legislates, there's a slightly different approach. So in the first instance, it would be working on the kind of the paper analysis and the paper policy approach. But what I can tell you is that there is independence for the committee in that process. And I just want to tell you a bit more about the process if I can find the right email. So the Public Service Ombudsman's Act 2015 was brought by the then OFMD-FM committee, and at conception and bill development there was a project team including the clerk assistant of bills, head of legal services, bill clerk, committee clerk, and the OFMD-FM committee undertook considerable consultation and policy development. So obviously we've skipped beyond that stage before completing a committee report recommending a bill, and then plenary approval of that committee report occurred, and that after that there was a process to agree drafting instructions, which again is similar to the private members bill process. So the instructors to drafter then would be finalised. As you know, there has been a draft already provided of these legislative intentions in the committee's amendments. The framework of drafters of external drafters might be involved in just shaping those into like one piece, and obviously having the right insertion points to amend the existing bill, and so that phase there would be an iterative process where the committee and the drafter engages just to make sure that the instructions are clear, and then once that bill is finalised to the committee's satisfaction and capable of being introduced into the Assembly system, it would follow the same primary legislative process as the other bills that you see. Introduction being just a chance to get it printed, and then second stage being a debate on the principles of the bill, and then the bill team. So when you have an executive bill, you have officials at the end of the table. Obviously, we had 2 officials help us with the previous one. In the case of a non-executive bill, it would be the committee clerk and the legal advisor, so probably Jonathan McMullan or one of his team, who would be doing that job of explaining and clarifying and defining and answering any queries. And then the bill clerk, so someone in the role of Stephen Orme, if not Stephen himself, would provide procedural advice on the legislative process. So in the case of the OFMD-FM Public Services Ombudsman Act, an ad hoc committee delivered the committee stage. So I'm not sure, that may be what is arrived at in the instance of this, because you wouldn't really want to be both the sponsor necessarily and the scrutineer. So there would be, that's something that we would need to sort out during the process. The Ombudsman's bill, the committee stage was between May and September. So given that there's a recess in there, not a very long one, and 3 months really, but an ad hoc committee would only be working on that one bespoke topic, which means that the project would hopefully be done more quickly. And I think the other comparator bill is the Commission bill, which went through relatively recently, and that again is I haven't got the precise detail here, but the timeline of that would indicate that it is reasonable to expect that a committee amendment bill to the uniforms bill would be achievable in this mandate. So you can see that there are certain things that still need to be bottomed out, and we can obviously have the bill office come and advise when we've had a consideration of those. But everyone is aware. Everyone's been great. We were thinking about it. And would you like a briefing on that relatively soon, Deputy Chair?
I think we should move as quickly as possible.
Okay.
I think, despite what you say, there is a fairly constrained timeline. With 18 months, less than 18 months, because the Assembly will wind up in March at some time.
Yeah.
So, I wouldn't want to dilly-dally on this, that the guidelines, according to the Minister, will be out in a couple of weeks' time. But if Ronnie Armour's letter, the principles, or any reflection of what is going to be in the guidelines, I think we should be pressing on. The only, in my view, having read the letter, the only thing that it really says is that schools should be mindful of low-income families when designing their uniform or deciding what their uniform's going to be. So, to me, I think we should press on. We have a chance in the committee to bring in legislation that would make a significant difference, not just in terms of affordability, but also in terms of equality. And that was one of the big issues that was discussed during the debate the other day.
Can I maybe come in here just to sort of we can bring some focus to this in terms of next actions? In terms of the process and the information you've received, what would be the next step then in progressing that, just so we know what that would be? And I suppose the committee will need to make a decision as to whether that should happen before guidelines arrive. I would be still of the view I would really like to see the guidelines before we progress anything in too much detail, because I'm mindful of creating uncertainty for schools and parents also.
So the next step that I would be proposing would be to plan out a process and have the relevant officials that I've mentioned brief the committee on that. Next week, if that's the committee's objective, and just there are a couple of question marks just about would there be an ad hoc committee, etc. Just to scope those out and have a plan in place. Would that be helpful?
Yeah. Is that something that can be done by a written briefing? Can they provide that as a written briefing? Because I'm conscious as well of members' time with next week with the Minister here. That would be my only concern. If we have a lengthy briefing procedure on procedural issues at the start, it's going to eat into our time to scrutinise the work of the Minister. But
I'm happy with a written briefing.
If we get a written briefing so that we're clear in the process. Yeah. Can I suggest we maybe also just get a letter away to the Minister to ask when he will publish the guidelines? Because I think we, not just for our purposes, but for, I'm really conscious, schools are writing their policies now for the prospectuses in November, which we were told was absolute, the critical date.
He's the one who said the guidelines have to be out before November, before the prospectuses go out.
Clock is ticking, and again, if they land on half term, when principals, that work will be done. Boards of Governors will not be meeting over half term to completely rejig their uniform policies, and that has always been my concern with the timelines of this process. So I think a clear answer from the Minister would be really helpful, and we can ask him next week, but let's put it in writing as well. when they will arrive, and then we'll be in a position to, I think, make some clear decisions. Is there agreement on that at this stage? Any alternative views, Gary?
I suppose just to reiterate what we said last week, just in terms of, I think it is important that we do see the guidelines. I think that let's not get ahead of ourselves, particularly in terms of the work programme. Obviously the Minister will be up next week, and let's hope that it's a bit more edifying and dignified than it has been in the past, that we don't focus on narrow issues such as a football pitch in a school because of their particular background, but the focus, I suppose, is in those issues which we're trying to prioritise as a committee. So I think we wait and see the guidelines, and let's see where that goes from there.
Can I just object to that statement again? That's again sectarianising this issue, and there was no attempt at any stage in this committee's scrutiny of that particular issue to sectarianise it. There was, a clear case of money being given to a particular project that didn't even match the EA's handbook or the EA's handbook in terms of the spec for that particular pitch. We also had the Minister of Communities in at a meeting with the school and the soccer club that uses the pitch, and yet we never got an explanation as to why he was there. So there are plenty of questions, and there are a lot of other schools in the area that have many issues in regard to maintenance and so on, and haven't received any funding. So one with the roof actually falling in that children had to be moved out of. So
we don't want to, no, we're not getting down because, as I say, it's already been well.
Just ask for a very brief comment because I don't think we have the time or the luxury to rehearse.
It's been well rehearsed, and I suppose the time was found when the Minister was here to spend a lot of time on that and not on other issues. But it was worth saying that those of us who actually represent the area know those schools that are in need, and those that have received funding from right across the board from all communities. I think the single out of one school, people in my constituency know exactly why that was. Thanks, Chair.
We've got both have had the opportunity to put comments in the record. Look, I'm going to bring in Cara and then David, and then I'm going to close this item down because we are, as always, up against it with time. We've got two really important briefings ahead of us, and I want to make sure we have time for those. Cara, I'll bring you in first, and I would ask both members to be brief.
Yes, certainly, Chair. Just to say that I reject Gary's point. I think it's important for us as a committee to our roles to hold the Minister and the department to account. And I think in our last time with the Minister, we did just that, and that's essentially our role as a committee, and we shouldn't apologise for doing so. And just to say, any clarity we can get on Pat's point, I would welcome that as well. Thank you.
Cara. David?
Thanks, Chair. First of all, to reiterate, as Gary said, I don't think just in terms of seeing the guidelines, of course it'll be useful to see the guidelines, but just put on record, I object to the very notion that we would have a committee bill around this. I think it's a ridiculous idea that we would bring forward a committee bill to a piece of legislation that has not even been put into force yet. So that's our line on that. I have to say, I see that Pat is still dancing on the same head of a pin that he was dancing on in the chamber when we last debated this issue. People will have watched the last committee session with the Minister. They'll have seen the ongoing obsession, which still seems to be lingering around that, and they will make their own decision, whether you call them Protestant schools or whatever you wish to call them. But, he may well be technically correct in that, but everyone knows the motivations that were behind that and will decide for themselves on that. And I think it was laid bare. We don't see the same concerns made around other schools that have had facilities put into them, but it's good to see that it continues on and people can make their own decisions on that. Thanks, Chair.
Just correct the record, Chair.
This is final point on this.
Just
time. We
correct
are
the
now
record.
really up against it with time.
It was the Minister who raised this issue, not me.
Yeah, so
he raised it in the chamber.
To draw a line under that, I don't think we've any clear objections to anything that's been suggested in terms of how we take forward the issues raised by the Deputy Chair. In terms of the Minister's comments in the chamber, a lot of them were directed at the work of the committee. I think we can all stand over the work of this committee and how hard every member works on it. that's the minister's prerogative if he wants to throw that sort of those sort of remarks around. But I do think it is important to note that the use of, in my view, the use of the phrase "a Protestant school" is not appropriate, as no such thing exists. And my understanding is that controlled schools are open to all. And I say that as a governor of a local controlled school, that I certainly would not adhere to that description of that sector. Okay, so that moves us on, I think, to item 5 on the agenda, which is draft minutes. So I'd refer members to the minutes of the committee meeting of the 8th of October at page 8 of your papers. I would just seek members' agreement. That's a full and accurate record of proceedings. Are we agreed? No, agreed. Thank you. Okay, so that takes us on. Now we are now playing catch up with time again. Just a top heavy agenda at the start of the meeting. So we will moving on to item 6. So I would refer members, if you want to bring the witnesses through, to the briefing note from the committee clerk at page 19, the briefing paper at page 21, and a report on local empowerment at page 28. This is an oral briefing from the Bytes project and some other youth stakeholders. It is on the Sir Halley Trust research, but I think that probably sounds a little bit obscure to maybe anyone watching, but I think as the witnesses will outline, this is a piece of research that really feeds in very directly to some of the really key policy considerations in youth work provision and delivery in Northern Ireland. So I'm certainly very, very keen to hear some of the findings on this research today, as I think it is really timely, but the witnesses will be able to expand on that in more detail. So very pleased to be able to welcome today Stephen Dallas, the Chief Executive Officer of the Bytes Project. We have Steve Morrison, the CEO of Streetbeat. We have Sean McMullan, Youth Representative from the New Lodge Youth Centre, and Ruth Walker, the Research Lead with the Bytes Project. So you're all very welcome here today, and I think probably the briefing, the Sir Halley Trust research that probably doesn't give us a sense of what to expect, but I have to say I am really, really interested in what you've got to bring today, because I think it's a really, really helpful intervention into some of those discussions around how we effectively deliver youth services in Northern Ireland, and trying to really come to some real clear policy positions on that. So I think this should be a really helpful briefing. But it is really over to you to set out the research, and then we'll move to question and answer. So if I could suggest 10 minutes, up to 10 minutes for initial report, and then we'll move into question and answer. We are chasing our tails time-wise a bit, so it will be quite strictly sticking to 5 minutes per member in terms of inquiry. So I would ask, and it's always an issue when we have a bigger panel, just to try and make sure even in your answers that you're getting to the key information quickly, and so that we can get round all the members in good time. But it's over to yourselves. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair, and lovely to be here. So in June 2024, 6 regional organisations came to the committee before your summer recess the last time, and we were representing about 100 local youth organisations from across Northern Ireland, and we outlined the need to change the status quo and how youth services would be delivered. That was our general premise. Inherent in that input was the idea that youth services would flourish with local ownership through the community and voluntary organisations. But that was all our feeling. So we wanted to try and give you a bit more evidence around that, and that's what we think we're bringing here today. And Ruth, in a moment, is going to outline just some of the key themes of the research, so you can have a feel for it. But it's condensed in page 8 and 9 of the report, particularly when it comes to Steve and Sean and the stuff that they were able to achieve. I also want to acknowledge the role of 2 other partners who couldn't join us today. One is Celine Dunn, who's the Director of the City of Dublin Youth Services, and Maria O'Donoghue, who's the Youth Service Manager at Braddock Youth Centre, just behind the post office on O'Connell Street. Brilliant place for a youth centre, absolutely brilliant place. So they couldn't come today. I don't think anyone here in the committee is really going to resist the idea of empowering local community and voluntary organisations to deliver youth services. But we do have a barrier, and that this research will talk a little bit about that barrier, particularly in our first recommendation. The first is the legislation which we operate under here in Northern Ireland is really, as you would all be aware, the 1986 Education Order, which currently says that the lead authority can deliver services alone or together with the community and voluntary sector. It gives a choice. 50 years ago, that made sense. 1986 wasn't the same as what we've got now here, nearly 49 years later. But there's a second barrier, which is really in the Priorities for Youth Policy, which was out in 2013. There's a line which very clearly that the statutory sector will continue to deliver youth services where there's no viable alternative. So the community voluntary sector perspective, we feel like we're stuck between these two poles, because there's an option of delivering alone, and then there's an option of the statutory service delivering where it's necessary almost. So the community, we say we feel stuck in that, but really since May 2024, the Department of Education Youth Policy team have done a brilliant job in engaging the broad sector, and I think the community voluntary sector and the statutory sector have done a brilliant job in giving information and young people being part of that process as well. It's been really strong. But this research brings timely considerations, I believe, for the department and for the minister, we hope. And you'll see from the recommendations in page 12 and 13, we're crystal clear what we think would really enable this transformation to allow local empowerment through the community and voluntary sector. I'm going to let Ruth and Steve now and Sean there are going to talk. You'll be more interested in that. So I'm going to hand over to Ruth, who's going to give a bit of an overview of the research so you have a feel for it rather than having to read it too much. And then it's back over to you, Nick, and the committee to ask some questions.
Thanks very much, Stephen, and thank you all for your time this afternoon. So my name is Ruth Walker, and I'm an independent researcher, and have worked with the Bytes project to conduct this research, and as you noted, funded by the Sir Halley Stewart Trust. And I undertook an analysis of 3 youth providers, 2 in Belfast, namely Streetbeat, Steve's organisation, and New Lodge Youth Centre, which Sean is responsible for, and Bradog Youth Service in Dublin. But alongside looking at some practice and service providers, I also traced the process by which the City of Dublin Youth Service managed the transfer of youth services from state to voluntary and community ownership. So in the research, I should also say the research was guided by an advisory group. So DE participated in that. We invited the EA's youth service to participate in that. They weren't able to, but a member of the EA's shared education personnel did to participate in that advisory group. And the research really did find compelling evidence that whole communities, so that's young people, but the population of the whole community, even behind the young people, were more likely to flourish when voluntary and community organisations lead youth services. And based, as Stephen alluded to, based on our evidence, our main recommendation to the department's youth policy team is to set a legislative and policy direction that determines that the voluntary and community sector should be the main delivery mechanism for youth work and broader youth services in Northern Ireland, and thereby providing clarity to the EA Youth Service. So that's our key recommendation around setting a legislative and policy direction that determines voluntary and community sectors should be the main delivery mechanism. And alongside that key main recommendation, there were 6 further recommendations about how that could actually be realised in practice. That was around working towards that necessary legislative change, establishing some sort of infrastructure oversight body, multi-agency, that would oversee any process, developing a revised funding formula, and key to this is that we're not expecting necessarily additional funding, but a revision of how funding is distributed. And obviously an awful lot of necessary planning ahead around the staffing and the asset implications of any change. But returning just to give you a little bit of a flavour of the research findings, looking at those 3 organisations, the 3 things I just want to mention very briefly were within the organisations a strong ideology or culture from which their practice stemmed, the particular approaches they deployed and the outcomes that they are achieving. So firstly, that ideology or culture, it came in every instance very clearly from a leader, but it was evident across staff teams. And it was encapsulated by words that came to me like courage, compulsion, passion, respect, trust in the leader, and regular, disciplined, professional reflection in the teams. And it resulted in what I came to recognise in the 3 organisations as a community built from within. So the organisations themselves had a deep sense of team and commitment to one another and to their organisation, to their brand, if you like, and considering depth of commitment. But that was before you even think about their depth of commitment to the young people in the communities. There was a really strong, compelling culture within the organisations. And secondly, in terms of approaches, 3 of particular, there was lots of different things I could have picked out, but 3 particular to note were firstly that education was very much seen to be at the heart of their youth work, and that was understood by everybody, and often including the young people themselves. And that the young people were encouraged to be in the lead, and they were recognised within their full social and community context, and very much encouraged to see themselves as an asset within their community. And thirdly, and probably most strikingly, that approaches were grounded upon strong community networks, local agencies and individuals being seen to be with and behind the youth service providers. Now, that required a huge amount of effort and energy, but it bore significant fruit. And if I just may pick out 2 examples to bring that to life. So New Lodge work very closely with social services, which is giving social workers an opportunity to build relationships with families and young people through the auspices of a youth centre, and building closer trust and closer ties and meeting families in a context that they just weren't able to do working alone. And Streetbeat's work in schools, in a number of schools, but most markedly probably the Boys Model, where they have 3 members of staff embedded in school life. And the staff in Boys Model have worked to create an evidence base of the impact of that over a number of years, the impact of the boys that have engaged most closely with Streetbeat in school and in the community. And they've evidenced a significant difference in their GCSE attainment and their school attendance than would have been anticipated for those boys when they started out their school career. So that's something a little bit about the approach. And then with respect to the third, the outcomes, we definitely find compelling outcomes. And again, just to pick out 3, first of all, a reach to and significant breakthroughs with really significantly marginalised young people in all 3 locations, particularly in Dublin. That was achieved through diversion projects that actually had really good relationships with the Garda. I've already talked about improved educational attainment, and alongside that, evidence of all sorts of growth in young people's confidence in their skills and their sense of connectedness. And thirdly, the whole community impact that other agencies, other individuals, other training organisations, schools, community organisations are benefiting from and being lifted by the youth services in their communities. So I suppose increasingly convinced by the evidence that we were sort of uncovering, we charted how the City of Dublin Youth Service managed the transfer of 12 youth services over the period 2004 to 2024. So we're around a 20-year period, 12 youth services that were statutory run transferred to voluntary ownership, and they established advisory groups in each of those communities with local individuals. They gradually, through staff investing in them, they gradually helped them build the governance skills they needed, and then incrementally over a period of 20 years, once those advisory groups were in a good position, they gradually transferred ownership from the statutory to the community and voluntary sector. But it was clear that Ireland's Youth Work Act, that 2001 Youth Work Act, provided a really clear legislative context for that transfer. And so just to finish, the City of Dublin leadership were really clear in 4 things in the interviews that we conducted with them. These 4 things came through, and with these I conclude. First of all, that, and this is in the Dublin context, that youth work is most effective when it emerges from and it is delivered within a community development context. The second thing, that the voluntary and community sector, this is their words, is best placed to lead delivery. Thirdly, that state delivery cannot deliver the same outcomes, and their observation is that the quality of the work delivered by the statutory sector tends to diminish in quality over time. But thirdly, fourthly, and really very importantly, they do recognise that the state continues to have a key enabling role in providing funding, providing capacity building, providing vision, credibility, and ensuring accountability. So that's a summary of the research and I suppose a context for the asks that we bring forward to the committee today.
Great.
Thank
You very much. So, look, I mean, I'll kick off. I mean, you've set out sort of the findings of the research. Can you maybe just tell us a little bit more about why specifically you feel that the community and voluntary sector are in a better position to deliver those really effective youth work interventions in communities?
It has two guys beside me to adapt to that.
Hi, yeah. So, I mean, for us, I think the reality is, in terms of working with young people today, young people are there's multiple needs for young people, and so I think for us we need to have a degree of flexibility, which is where I think the community multi-sector is very strong. For us, in terms of Streetbeat, and I know Sean will be the same in other organisations, we would use a wraparound approach. So we would have a number of services and working with young people. That could be anything from drop-in, where young people can come in at night, working in schools, group work programs where you're working in terms of long-term impact on young people, mentoring, counselling. And what we find is, in terms of working with young people through any of those services, it's about building a relationship with the young people over a long period of time, to the point at which you can go, look, we also have this service, and trying to engage them in a number of services, because I think in terms of having a bigger impact on them, then you need to be addressing all the individual needs, and sometimes those don't come up until you have a relationship with them and they're opening up to you. Also, in terms of that long-term approach, sometimes, again, we are not seeing the impact until maybe 2-3 years down the line, and we're in a strong position embedded in the community, where we are able to engage with these young people over a long term. We have a number of examples in terms of even our staff who have come through from the age of 11 right through, and have become qualified youth workers, and they're given back into their own communities, and so young people are seeing these role models in their own communities, and that shows a real positive impact in terms of the future of young people going and looking up to them. So I think the fact that we're embedded in the community, the fact that we have the ability to move very quickly in terms of needs arising for young people, gives us a real strength in terms of the voluntary sector.
John, did you want to come in? Or?
Yeah. I think just to sort of support the point that Steve made as well around that multi-agency approach, from a grassroots sort of community youth work perspective, we, in my opinion, are really well placed to understand the needs of the wider community, but also, most importantly, in this for young people. And we play a fundamental role, and we have done, particularly in North Belfast, and been able to support young people in the accessing the required statutory services, that at times there could be a number of barriers. And I think that begins to unravel the importance of youth work amongst our young people's lives, because we are working with young people 5-6 nights a week. We understand the needs that they're presenting, and again, we all know youth work's voluntary. Our young people choose to access our provision, and for that we have to use that as a strength, and we have to be able to build upon that and to be able to best support our young people. And as Steve said, it's very much so, and this isn't just the community and voluntary sector. A young person, when they enter our provision, enters a journey, and it's about, for us, how can we best support that? And like I said, it's been able to pull upon that multi-agency approach, and that's one thing that we have done, particularly in Greater New Lodge. It's about using all the expertise to be able to support young people with all the complexities that they're facing. We know that our society is evolving. Stephen alluded to earlier on, legislation goes back to the 1980s. Society's evolved from that, but also, a lot of other issues sort of are popping its head up now. And being able to support young people at a community level, I feel, where they're safe and they're feeling valued and they're comfortable within their own settings, helps a lot of issues. And I think that's where strength is for us.
Thank you both. I think there's probably evidence sessions we could run just on your two provisions. I think the work in schools, that multi-agency approach you're talking about, Sean, I think there's a huge amount there, and possibly as we get to looking at issues like attendance and those sort of issues in school, there's maybe more to pick up there. In the interest of time, I'll just ask one other question. I imagine the EA, if they were here, would say that we do work in partnership with the community and voluntary sector. So under your proposals, if you were to implement change, what would be different? What would you be able to deliver that you can't now?
Look at me. So it's an interesting one, because I think we can't get away from I was thinking about this sector as a whole. It is phenomenal. What Northern Ireland has as a youth sector from all parts is absolutely phenomenal. Schools work, evening work, group, it's really, really strong. But the issue is in the legislation, being you can deliver it alone or together. It is a choice then. And it shouldn't be a choice. It should be very clear, of like in the Republic of Ireland context that Ruth outlined so well. It's so clear in the 2001 Youth Work Act, community and voluntary sector, main delivery mechanism. There's no doubt. The other thing I would say on that is there has been, and I was going to name check somebody here who's not in the youth service anymore, but he's really quite an important guy. A number of years ago, the person who led the youth services, if you like, was a guy called Gerard Dorn. I don't know if anybody know him, but he worked in the Southern Board and the Western Board. This guy found ways to deal with alone or together, and he made it work, and he found balance. But we can't allow it to be personality driven. It's got to be in the writing, not in the policy, but in the legislation, giving us guidance. So we need to find a way to make sure when you've got a strength, which is, there's layers in what you said, what you just described there, Nick. There's no other layers there with the guys, and making sure that's not unique. There's about 60 of those in Northern Ireland in the community and voluntary sector, 60 or 70. And EA has the same within their gift as well. But we need to find a way to make it clearer about the direction of travel going forward. The budget's always been 36 million. It's not going to go up. The Independent Review of Education said it should be 70 million. Are we getting that? Everybody in this room knows that better than us. We need to use it better. And the conversation has to get into, well, how do we make choices? But if you can choose alone or together, that shouldn't belong. That should be much clearer from the policy and definitely in the legislation. So I would like to get away from that ability to make that choice independently. I'd have to say, I'd like us collectively, with people like Sean, and there's millions of other people who can do this, getting them more in the room to say, actually, we can do this for young people in our area. And would the money go further? 1,000,000,000%.
Thank you, Stephen. That's great. Look, I'll bring in the Deputy Chair. Already had a couple of people indicate, so I think our systems start to deteriorate around that very quickly. So I'll ask other members to indicate through the clerk, and maybe before the next briefing, I'll just cover the best way to indicate to come in and when. So Pat, I'll bring you in.
And just in terms of the Dublin transfer, it took almost 20 years and required significant investment from the Education and Training Board to build governance capacity. So I'm just wondering, in terms of that capacity within the community and voluntary sector here, in terms of building that capacity, what would that cost, and how long would it take to reach that similar situation that happened in Dublin?
We haven't priced. We didn't go into the detail of pricing that. Well, probably what I would say is that process started in the late 90s in Dublin, and a lot of those organisations and groups that they were starting with in local communities, it was literally a number of local individuals that they were approaching and saying, would you come and form an advisory group for your area?
It's more like, please, would you come and do this?
And then over years, a staff member from the Education Training Board worked with them to build their skills, as you understand correctly. But I don't think that is like for like here in Northern Ireland. I think there's a much stronger sector that would already be much more almost oven ready, if you like, than it would have been in the Dublin context. So
and what does it look like in the sector in regard to governance capacity, for example, which is going to be really necessary in that new type of situation?
So I would be looking to what things like what we've within the sector, NICFA, the volunteer now, they all have really good systems for the code of good governance that we all adopt and we all understand. What we've never had is really strong investment for that to get stronger. And actually, so you manage X at this moment in time, but could you get to Y or could you get to Z? Absolutely. But it's just about making sure that we have that governance support to be able to scale it up. But it's absolutely, Ruth defined it beautifully there, like the idea that within Dublin, it was really, would you please do this? This will be for your community. We are here already. European funding is definitely part of that. NICFA is definitely part of that ecosystem. And I would definitely say people in youth work in Northern Ireland, doesn't matter where they're coming from, they all love this and they want to make sure this is secure. So we've got all the ingredients. What's not right is the overarching structure within the legislation and policy.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Donny, I'll bring you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I'm going to start with the priority for youth. It was the Minister was actually in, it was March of 2024 in the committee, and I asked him around the priority for youth, and he agreed with what I was saying and what you're saying as well. Where the community and voluntary sector can deliver it, then they should deliver it, and the statutory body should step back and provide that support. Now, I know a review, it's my understanding the review took place or began in 23, the end of 23, and should be ready on priority for youth either the end of this year or the start of 26. Should be. I don't know if it will be. And I'm just wondering what engagement have you had with the Minister on that particular issue?
I would say Sean and Steve and myself all represented and supported the department to bring all that information together, which started in May 24. They went full tilt at it. And I think they did a brilliant job. I think they got really good information from the whole youth sector. Problem is, they've got a lot. So and they've also, they absolutely, the department put children and young people at the centre, you know. So like food became a big issue for young people, like really clear. And the department definitely heard that. And I think the Minister has met that group of young people. The Minister has been definitely engaging with his department officials. But there's a bit of a mistake now. Obviously, it goes in and we're waiting for the output. We don't know anything, and it's one of the reasons why our first ask for the committee is to write to the department and ask, where is this at? Please tell us where that's, give us some update. And particularly your point there about what the Minister echoed what you were saying at that committee meeting, but that needs to get into words soon. And it's okay in the policy, because it was in priorities for youth largely, but it's not in the legislation. And we recognise that's a journey, that's going to take time, but it needs to start.
Yeah, and I suppose we're coming up to that period of time when the new specifications are going to be coming out, and I'm no doubt you're all doing them meetings internally and locally. And
we have a meeting at 5:30 today.
Yeah, and then it's that worry, because the big problem I have with the whole model, and I get it, because you probably have to be restrained on what you say, because the EA are your funder, your collaborator, monitor. It's very difficult for the community and voluntary sector when it's set up that way. So,
absolutely.
I understand what you're saying, Danny, and that is a challenge. And part of the reason why I came on board on behalf of the New Lodge Youth Centre and sort of wider North Belfast with this piece of research is simply to, one, showcase how strong we can be in the community voluntary sector. But I also think it's important to point out that not every area is like this, and there is required to be some statutory provision, and there can't be a massive overhaul. We all know this. That takes a lot of time. They alluded to down south. It took 20 years to even get into a position where they were able to hand over sort of provision and stuff like that. But one thing I will and I do stress is that coexisting now in 2025 isn't adequate. There needs to be respectful partnerships, and I think we're moving towards that. And I'm talking about across EA, Department of Education, and the community and voluntary sector. I think we're moving towards that. But I think an important point that Stephen alluded to, the biggest difficulty for all of us is, you think about the policy and the legislation, is that we can exist when deemed necessary, and fundamentally, and there needs to be that respectfulness and that integrity towards the community and voluntary sector to understand that we are as equally as important as what the statutory sector is too. And that's a challenge for us, because when you're reading legislation and it's saying, EA is, the arm's length body who has a statutory obligation to deliver youth service, and they can't do so alone, that sort of diminishes the importance, in my opinion, of the community and voluntary sector.
Because you should be working with a very hard to reach core group of young people in our communities, and that could start with just saying hello one week, and then the next week it leads on to something, and they may never get them into the centre. But what I find is a big problem is you may only have a pot of funding through a specification whatever what way they want to call it, where it's outreach or well-being, but that money can then be gone. And it's not that that's a cut to youth services per se, but the pie's being sliced more in the community voluntary sector, where then it's spread to other places, probably on good merit as well, but it then unravels the work and that's been done with probably a hard to reach group of children in our community who are probably the most vulnerable.
The only thing I would just
brief comment, and then we'll move on to the next member.
This is a personal view. I think EA have been listening really hardly. I really intently particularly last year. They've been trying to work out what way is the best way to navigate this forward. And I have to say, like, people who've been in this committee, Michael Hogg is funding. He's got a funding team behind him. They are listening. They're really, I felt, engaged in a way that, as Sean's saying. But two things we're missing. Sean's just highlighted it perfectly. The context is you can still make a choice. And that's not right, and that needs dealt with over a period of time. But secondly, we need an infrastructure that allows us to come together equally, that the department needs to convene, and that's our second recommendation. Those two things would take us to the territory that I believe we could go over the next year or two. And some of the things that we are starting to see in kind of sapling form, if you like, we could definitely nurture them into something stronger. But we can't coexist anymore. It's got to get into real strong partnerships.
You, Stephen. Gary, you'd indicated next.
Yep, thanks, Chair. Thank you for that and for this important piece of research. Some very good examples in my constituency and Foyle of community-led. I have to say it's not consistent, as you said. There's some areas that are particularly well-resourced, if you like, and some areas which aren't. I suppose, and Sean, on your point, you had said about the importance of knowing the issues, and I suppose I wanted to just tease out in terms of the difference from your perspective in terms of community-led, statutory-led, and how those who are in there, do you see it in terms of the community-led that they are more, if you like, in touch with the needs of the community? Is that because they are from those particular communities, that they come up through the system? I know that that's a particular issue I've seen in my own constituency in terms of statutory, is that people tend to be moved around a bit, and it doesn't maybe just meet the needs. So just maybe how you feel in terms of that difference.
I think one thing I will say, and again, my area is North Belfast, in particular Greater New Lodge. There's great work happening right across both community and voluntary and statutory. I think, we have a more of adaptable approach probably in the community and voluntary sector, due to probably less red tape in terms of obviously those who are delivering EA controlled youth services. And I think we have got ourselves into a position now where other statutory bodies are beginning to understand the importance, not beginning, but showing that they understand the importance of grassroots youth work, because a lot of the young people they're engaging actually voluntarily come through our doors. So I think it's difficult to be able to say, one's better than the other or whatever. I think it is important though that where there is an option for the community and voluntary sector to thrive, I think that should be resourced as well as what the statutory should. I think it goes hand in hand, because I know I'm just thinking even in communities myself that we work across North Belfast just aren't quite ready to be able to take on the community and voluntary sector, and if we were to pull away that statutory resource, then it would be detrimental to the community. However, I think relationships are key, and I think we're a lot more, I don't want to offend anybody.
He's finding the word out.
A lot more adaptable in our approach.
It's not about putting one against the other. The point being is that what I see in terms of sometimes the community-led is certainly it is much more flexible. There's no doubt about that. Even when it comes to, we've had some serious instances around violence, things like that. And the community-led has been a sort of a better approach, certainly what I've seen in terms of that wraparound. The other point, just briefly, because there's a lot of questions, was in the report it talked about the educational attainment and improving outcomes around engagement with schools, etc. Could you maybe tell us a bit more as to, I suppose the difference that a community-led approach would take as opposed to statutory on that front?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the research that was taken directly from our work in the Belfast Boys model, so we had a youth worker based in the school, and over a 3-year period that grew in terms of us to having 3 youth workers based 5 days a week in the Boys model, half their time in the school and half the time in the community as well. And that really was our approach, working with those young people at risk of leaving school without any qualifications, poor attendance, and working with them in many different ways in terms of that one-to-one support, in group work, doing qualifications with them. And a lot of that was about increasing their confidence, looking at aspirations and trying to raise that and trying to get them to look to the future. And so we took the 3 years of data in terms of all the young people that we had worked significantly with, and this was actually, it's on page 44 of the report, where the school had looked and used their own tracking to be able to show the significant improvement in attendance of the young people that we had worked with. So there's 108, and then as well around the actual predicted GCSEs to achieved, and again a significant improvement there. So I think the reality is, again, it comes back to flexibility. So we are working with those young people in the school. You're engaging with them at the point of need. They're getting referred, identified by the school. It's a proper partnership where you're working with the school. Then again, we're working with them in the community, and there is no one fix. It is working in many different areas, and some of these young people we'll be working with in the school will maybe be engaging with us 4 or 5 times a week, and a lot of the time it could maybe be issues at home. That is the reason that they're not engaging in school. That's the block. It could be around literacy. It could be a number of issues, but again, it's getting those conversations and building relationships with young people until you actually get to find out what those are, to then work on those. And again, sometimes that's directly with ourselves, and sometimes it's in partnership with the school, or sometimes it's in the community. So it actually surprised us in terms of the impact it was, but again, in some ways you can see it evident in front of your face with some of these young people who have no interest in school, and then some of them are actually staying on to do A levels and even looking further than that. So really big impact on that.
Can I just very quickly
briefly.
to say 2 things. First of all, one thing that really struck me was that often that is the first hook, meeting young people. And you don't think about that. A community-based volunteer youth organisation, first contact with a young person is at school, because that's where they are, and then gradually they build up the confidence to invite them, particularly for young people who are really socially isolated. Why don't you think about coming down to Streetbeat on the Woodstock or Woodville Road some evening? So the fact that a community youth organisation can have a first contact at school and then gradually build that into a community contact for a young person that maybe doesn't really do anything other than go to school and be at home. I was really struck by that. And the other thing, Gary, just to finish where you started, which was, I think, both New Lodge and Streetbeat and Braddock actually as well, were very clear in saying we love homegrown young people, and we love young people that have been with us since they were 11, gone right through our services, and now they're working with us. But we also want to get the best of the best in, and very often bringing fresh eyes and fresh approaches is really attractive to the young people as well. So I wouldn't say that it's all homegrown, it's a mix of
Thank you. Thanks, Stuart.
There's so much we can unpack here, and I'm already thinking an evidence session around youth work approaches in school is probably emerging out of this. I think that would be.
If you don't read much of the report, I really would encourage you to read. Those pages 42 to 44 is quite striking.
I think around the whole attendance issue in particular, I think that the role of youth work, I think, is total untapped potential, and it's great to hear some of those positive outcomes. Michelle, you'd indicated next.
Thank you, and thanks folks for the evidence so far. It's really fascinating to listen to you. I am going to a wee tiny bit hijack to highlight a project. There's a young woman in my constituency called Leah Myers, and she has a project that she's launched, a campaign called All Right Kid. She's really passionate about youth work, and this is based on her experiences as a service user and now as a volunteer. So first of all, I sent her a bit of a summary of what you had sent me last night to see what her reaction was.
I'm panicking.
No, I wouldn't raise it, only that she's very positive. But just to pick up some of what she said, it says, I think sometimes when government has control, especially when it comes to funding, they set goals that are so unrealistic when it comes to young people, because they don't know young people. So she's very enthusiastic as well about the approach in the south. So she's kind of endorsing very much what you said. In terms of her own campaign, All Right Kid, her main goal is to get youth workers, full-time members of staff in post-primary schools in Northern Ireland. And I assume there would be a lot of support from that from you guys. So I just wanted to hear from you about, I guess, if you would endorse what she's saying and perhaps maybe connect us together, because she's got a lot of enthusiasm for trying to advance this, and you've already provided a bit of evidence today in terms of the success of those kind of approaches in schools. So if you want to speak a wee bit more to that, then she would be delighted.
Quite often, there's a reason why a young person doesn't attend school, and Steve highlighted some of them reasons, whether it be at home or whether it be confidence. It seems like a lifetime ago with COVID. I definitely still see an impact, and even engaging some of our young people in terms of their confidence and their self-esteem and their willingness to be in larger crowds and that. And we forget sometimes that's what school is. It's quite a big social setting for young people as well as obviously an educational institution. I think youth work brings an approach that supports young people who aren't ready to go into the classroom and then informal environment, but it's still education, and I think that's why it works so well. And it's that educational, drive to help young people sort of succeed. I think is the hook for young people too. It's like, okay, I mightn't fit into this classroom environment, but there's other sort of settings that I can learn from. I bring it back to, when I first began to manage the Neurology Centre in 2021, and a lot of these deprivation measures are very real for us, and very real, most importantly, for our young people. We had myself and one other member of staff who were in university, and now fast forward 4.5 years, there's 17 people who's been employed by the centre and now on education, on their youth work journey and the community youth work degree are now finished. And that's really important for me, because around 75% of these people didn't gain A-levels. And for me, it shows the power of youth work, and most importantly, the power of having that one person or that role model to continue to inspire. You might have a negative experience due to many different reasons within school, but it doesn't mean your educational journey's over. And I think that's a real importance of having youth workers in school. It's about encouraging young people to fulfil their potential, whether that be formally or informally. And I'm a big advocate of the schools work, and would definitely be willing to sort of tie in there.
The other thing, I know we've been around a bit, but the whole community aspect, you've underlined that a number of times in terms of educational underachievement. It seems to be strong evidence that is the most effective way to actually get results. So again, do you want to just expand on that?
I think for me it's probably a hidden fabric in the community involvement sector how it supports schools. It definitely there's like there's a hidden web there that young people kind of fall out and they get that support, and obviously in the community involvement sector, in terms of that, the way we've described it in this session has really focused on just being there. And Steve and Sean have said that better for me. But what I do really want to make a point of is absolutely, you're definitely looking forward to that link. But I wanted to say something about the government and goals. It's personal to me. I do think the youth service team are definitely listening. They really are. They're definitely getting better at this. There is no doubt about that. But it keeps coming back. If you want to utilise us within schools, if you want to make us more of a sustainable way of doing that, we need to change it, that we become really a significant partner in doing this work. And that needs legislative change, and it needs a policy to say it. We need both things to be in alignment. And then the stuff that Leah's brilliantly hearing, imagine you had a really good funder doing that and clearly listening to you, and you had an infrastructure to deliver it. Could you get to a good world, a better world? It would be good for a couple of years to have that sort of dynamic going on. It really would.
And just very quickly, as a parent speaking into this, whose middle daughter in upper sixth is actually engaged on a Streetbeat peers mentoring program, accredited in sixth form. Coming from a more middle class area, if you like, where we don't experience deprivation, but because we don't live in an area where there is a youth centre on our doorstep, my daughter hasn't had the experience of going to that community-based youth club, but yet, so there is a value in not just in those young people who are most deprived, but also young people who have grown up in middle-class context, but who are getting a different voice coming into them through school, and that's what Streetbeat's doing in some of the grammar schools. One of
the things, just with in terms of, again, going back to adaptability and flexibility, like for us, we're in 10 post-primary schools across Belfast, and what we've learned is you know, in terms of going, and we're in grammar schools, we're in secondary schools, we're in integrated schools, it is, youth work has the ability to be flexible to the needs of that school. And we learned that, so we started off in the boys and girls model, but as we spread out, every school has a different need, and we were able to move with that. And I think that there is a real demand and a need from the schools as well. A lot of it at this point is being spread by word of mouth from principal going, you know, this is what's happening here. If it was a bit more strategic, it would be great, because, you know, when we go in, the schools are like, we've needed this. So yeah, I think.
And then we go, how much do you need?
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Michelle, Cara, you'd indicated next.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. Thank you so much to the panel. You can feel your enthusiasm in all the work that you do, and you're really meeting young people face to face. I just have one question in the interest of time, and it's around, I have a real passion around supporting children of addicts, alcoholics, and oftentimes when it comes to educational attainment, this is something that can be so challenging, and their home environment can be really difficult. And we know addiction is something that doesn't see class. You know, it really is in middle class homes, lower income families, high income families. And I'm just wondering, in your experience, maybe how you've seen addiction in the home impact children and their educational attainment, and maybe if you could speak to us as a committee about what more we can be doing to see those children, to hear their needs, and to help them on their education journey.
No, again, I think it's very important again about being embedded in the community, because the reality is, in terms of working with those young people, it's not just about working with young people, it's also about working with the families. So we will have, some of our work will be with parents and running parents groups, and that engages then with the families, and so we're able to both identify the needs within the family, and work to those. And sometimes that also means we're bringing in parents on a one-to-one basis with our counsellor. But other times then it's just being more aware of the needs for the young person and working with the young person directly on those. I think the reality is, obviously, you know, there's a lot of issues, and certainly substance misuse in the home has a massive impact on the young people's lives. And so, like, one of our sort of core values as an organisation is consistency, and that is about then that young person, even though they may be coming from a home where it's chaos and they don't know what they're getting from day to day, when they come into our organisation, they know exactly what they get. They know their youth worker, they know the youth worker is going to be the same way, you know, have the same attitude towards them every single time, and it again then, you know, brings that safety, and it just brings it back to that relationship building, so allowing the young person to open up, and sort of then to identify those needs. And then we can work with the schools in terms of that, and again it's about partnership and knowledge sharing, and the schools that we've been in have been really good in terms of then that flexibility, and, you know, whether that's around attendance and different things in which they will be adaptable themselves in terms of working with these young people to address their needs.
I think it's a very real scenario that we quite often find our young people dealing with. I think it reiterates the importance of youth services providing a safe space first and foremost, and a caring adult who has the capacity to support young people who are especially dealing with, you know, family addiction, and what sort of comes from that. And I think, and again, it reiterates the importance, particularly from the community and voluntary sector, to ensure that we have that multi-agency approach and that relationship where we can then signpost families into, you know, whether it be the trust or family support, so that there's the homes being supported as well as the young person. Because that's one thing I continue to stress. You know, we can work with a young person 6-7 days a week in the environment where they feel safe and comfortable, but they continue to go back to that home. We're facing them same challenges. You're not going to see, you know, the real development and the real, you know, support that's really required for that young person to be able to overcome them challenges. But when you're able to help, be able to put in that mechanism in place where it's a full wraparound, and we're true to what we're saying, a full wraparound service, then we have seen great benefits there.
Yeah, definitely what I hear in feedback from young people is with youth work, it's like the safe space. They can really open up, be themselves. And if they don't have a role model at home, they'll have that, at their local youth club or whatever. But no, thank you very much. That really helps. I suppose I want to keep those children at the forefront of our minds, because oftentimes they do act in that caring role in the home. And when they're around people like yourself, they can relax and just act their age and have someone safe to talk to. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for answering my question.
Thank you. Cara, not if Kathy, you're looking to come in there,
Yeah, is that okay?
John, yeah.
And John as well, yep. I'll bring you
Please.
in a moment, John, yep.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for your presentation. Apologies, I missed at the start of it there. I wanted to ask around, and Sean, you mentioned it about how you guys are quite condensed area. My constituency is quite rural, and it does have pockets, of more urban. And don't get me wrong, there is some fabulous youth provision within those rural areas as well. But do you feel that there is a gap there? There is something that's missing for those children who are in more kind of rural areas? And is there anything that should be being done to tackle that?
Never been
I didn't mean to direct
He hasn't been out of Belfast. He's getting nervous.
I didn't mean to direct it to you, Sean, just because you mentioned about how you guys are condensed.
It's a real challenge. I do some work as well on a regional basis too, and I understand that challenge as well. I feel that all young people should be able to access quality youth service, and I know we're quite stretched in terms of obviously resource and where it's been. And it seems to be, it's not going to increase, and it does challenge us to work a wee bit more creatively on a regional capacity. And obviously, Stephen can come in as CEO of a regional organisation, where how we begin to access young people who, because where they live in a rural sort of setting, they can become quite isolated.
Yeah.
And that is definitely a challenge, and we need to be able to continue to bring youth work to young people who want to access it. And I think that's an important thing, and I think there is definitely, from education authorities' perspective, and also I know from the community of Voluntary, there's a real emphasis on that. How do we continue to enhance and increase that resource, so it could be a wider, young people can participate from a wider reach. But I'll leave the difficult answer over to Stephen.
It's funny, just because you said Bytes there, I haven't talked about Bytes, but I will just for a moment, because we left Belfast for youth work delivery, and from the start of this year, Bytes was delivered in Belfast for 30 years, and we just stopped, and we're working everywhere else but. And the reason is, it's actually we've made an organisational decision to pivot towards towns and villages, because we believe that they deserve, they need it, and it should be closer and it should be more accessible. But that's more not for this research, but it's definitely something we're going to write about very soon, because we think that there's we have really amazing, like if you mean Uri, amazing, like my staff was at Magnet Centre 2 weeks ago. It's phenomenal. But it's then, imagine Magnet Centre had responsibility for a 10-mile radius, could do it. Not yet, but soon they could, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm sort of going, we need to reimagine how, when we've got a place, do we limit them to Newry? Yeah. No, they could do far more than that and have satellites going in and out from it. That to me is the direction of travel, because it keeps the sustainability, because they've got, they're responsible for a wider area. When we narrow it down to the lowest atom, it's actually not been good. Yeah. Because you become very vulnerable to a change, a population change, deprivation, things can change, but then you lose all the good governance. But if you can do it differently, and one of the things in Dublin that they did was really, really, again, dealing with problems as you go along. Maybe there was 4 or 5 beside each other, but individually they were not the strongest. They merged, they spent time and merged them. And then suddenly you've got an organisation with a really decent budget, with a really decent sustainability, and it becomes necessary for the state. It becomes really important. What has the state done there? It's become an enabler, not a deliverer. It's enabled the community and voluntary sector, and that is a brilliant example in Dublin. I thought that is really good, and it gives me a vision of where potentially a new policy could go for youth work in Northern Ireland.
I think, for young people particularly who are living in rural settings, an easy fix, and it wouldn't fix all, would be more youth workers in their schools, so they have that access to a youth worker who can provide that informal support and that informal learning and that group work, and begin to help them understand what youth work is and what they can avail of. But I think you're right in what you're saying. There's a wider issue here in terms of resource. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And ties into this as well. I've been dealing with a group of parents around emotional based school non-attendance, And one story that really struck out to me in particular was a child who was not able, through anxiety, was not able to attend school. I was actually quite naive to the impact of it on the entire family. But again, because this was a rural family, their local sports club was doing like a pilot kind of youth provision. That child was able to go to that youth provision, and it was because of that youth worker that was in there. They had built up that relationship. Do you see that there's youth services and youth provision could try and help? Because this is becoming a huge issue. We're hearing more and more in committee as well around school non-attendance as well, due to range of different reasons, but anxiety being probably up there.
It's a big topic opened up,
Yeah,
so that's
sorry.
just for a brief one as we are. Time's taken. Maybe just a very brief sort of
I
comment.
think that
And I
they're
think this is an
absolutely-
issue we may pick up, actually,
Yeah.
I think, on the back
The
of this
services
session.
definitely could do it, but for me the key way of doing that is it needs to be closer and more accessible to people. And we are building new centres that may cost £1 million or £500,000. Can we do that anymore? Potentially not. But what we could do is, I think about where Steve's operating from, in a shop on the Woodvale Road. And they're more. It's more manageable, because what's important? The space and the people in the space. Getting a sports hall built on, things are changing. Do you know what I mean? So it's the space, and I think the mindset, if it changed, I think in rural areas you could definitely make a different impact. And it could be, within Bytes we talk about, could you ever have a youth services within 5 or 10 miles of an individual young person? Like, we're nowhere near there, but it would definitely be a good vision.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Kathy. John, bring you in.
Yeah, thanks for that. Really enlightening. I'm also very grateful for the work you do and the briefing you give us. Just two very, very quick things. Young men obviously have a lot of issues, education, under-attainment, often the ones who are most likely to get involved in crime and addictions and all those other things. It's just one of the realities. I mean, I'm always concerned about the lack of males in the teaching profession. Is there, what's the sort of gender balance of youth workers in your organisations, and is there anything we can do to maybe encourage men into the teaching profession? And then the second one is just, I hear constant problems about apprenticeships and skills, and the sort of pathway into them and the support that young people get. Is that anything you can offer any insight into, in what kind of support young people get who might be interested in apprenticeships and that sort of encouragement, and are you sort of over the options?
You just want to do the men one, and I'll do the apprenticeship one.
Well, for me, in terms of our organisation, at a guess, I would say we're about 50-50 in terms of male-female.
Right.
And I would say I do some work with the university as well, and youth workers coming through, it's probably fairly similar. I think, you're right in terms of young men. One of the pieces of work that we do particularly to engage with them is we have an outdoor education element that we have started now to embed within our work, where we have some staff who are trained in outdoor education. So it means engaging some of these young people who would be involved more probably in risk-taking behaviours. We can take them out and do mountain biking, go into the mountains, climbing, and canoe and kayak, and we've ended up buying all this equipment to work with these, and some of those times we're engaging with young people in the school, taking them out. Other times it's young people in the community, and I do think it is very important to have role models generally for young people to look to, and sometimes then using these type of activities, getting them outside of their area, and then you're able to get alongside and have those conversations. Again, bringing it back to relationships. I mean, that is key to everything we do.
Your relationship with Impact Training is part of that?
Yeah, so that's another one in terms of it. It's a training organisation, so young people, when they leave school, and again this leads back to the schools in the long term, we'll work with young people from year 10, 11, 12, then if they leave school, a lot of the time they'll go to Impact Training, and we have youth workers based in there, we have youth workers based in alternative education, and we're, again, sometimes it's 5-6 years we're working with these guys, and that is when you're seeing the big impact in terms of this commitment that you're showing to the young person and going, I'm still here, even when sometimes you're not getting too much back. and that's where I think the big impact and the breakthrough sometimes happens.
And I think there needs to be a
Just
cultural...
ask very briefly, Sean, we're now up against the time-wise, and then for Stephen on apprenticeships, it'll be probably a fairly rapid answer. Sean, sorry.
There needs to be a cultural change, and it's difficult within school settings because they're working with so many different young people in one class setting. But for me, it's about, if the environment isn't right for the young person, the environment needs to change, not the young person. And we also need to be, we talk about in youth work, one of our biggest strengths is that we're person-centred. And Steve raised it earlier on, we are consistent, and it's about understanding a young person's issues, not just at a community level, but at an individual level. And when a person, as in a youth worker, consistently empathises and begins to understand why a young person isn't attaining well in school or attending, then when the young person who feels a lot more, listened to and valued, you begin to unravel, how can we actually help you succeed in your educational journey, whether it be formal or informal.
John, I'll write to you about our programme and I'll give you an insight into how youth workers are doing that, youth services. I'll write to you separately.
Perfect, thank you.
That's perfect, thank you very much. Okay. Don't think we have any other indications. I want to put on record a big thanks for the presentation. I think it's been a really positive and constructive intervention, and I think it set out a real vision of how community and voluntary and statutory provision can work together, but the need for that overarching legislative framework to bring that clarity on who the priority delivery partners should be, I think is really, really clear. So look, there's lots for us to take away, and I think there are undoubtedly further briefings the committee might be interested in, because some of the things you're speaking about start touching on a whole range of issues that the committee is interested in at the minute. So look, brilliant to hear from you all today, and it's been a really, really helpful briefing. Thank you all.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so while the witnesses are just making their way out, I think I'll make two proposals, hopefully suggestions of straightforward ways forward. I mean, I would want to suggest that we share the briefing paper and the research paper. We share that with the department. There are some three very clear asks around response to the research findings, clear policy statement on the role of the community and voluntary sector, and also the update from the department around that national youth work structure that they referred to and that work that had been ongoing, and then a request for support for further independent research. I think if we can just put those three asks to the department and see what comes back, but I think it should be a piece of work the committee should be looking to pick up based on what the response comes back on that. And I'll bring it in a wee second, Danny. I think I just sort of was half speaking to the clerk during the briefing. I mean, I think around attendance in particular, that probably after Christmas it would be, we've already expressed an interest in hearing from EA, and we mentioned some of that in closed session even last week, the department on it. But I think getting that youth work perspective that isn't just on the EA perspective is really important. I don't think anyone's here to denigrate EA provision, not at all. There is a space for both. But I think some of those non-statutory providers are delivering really, really important work in this space, so it'd be good to hear from them on that issue specifically, if everyone's agreed on that. Yeah. I'll just bring Danny, and you'd indicated.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it was really, really good, and I think when we have them in, they're in the Justice Committee, the why red briefing, and I think when you see that, if it comes into this committee, the compliment, a lot of what they're saying about that interventions, particularly the community and voluntary sector, it does seem to be that extra flexibility that they have, what they can bring to the streets as well as within the clubs. It's unreal.
Looking at that way, Riot work has been, they have tried to get a slot in with ourselves, and just scheduling has not worked in our favour, and I think that's something, if we are, potentially some of those wider issues in the role of youth work in education, the role of youth work within a school setting as well, there's possibly another group we could be hearing from. Okay, so I'll move on. We are definitely up against the time-wise, so I'm going to ask members to work with me just really briefly before I bring the next witnesses in and move on to the next item. In terms of indications, there's been a bit of slippage in terms of when best to indicate, and I know David had a proposal around when best to do it. It hasn't necessarily always landed, Gary, than John. This is before your time. I'm just going to suggest, really, I can't manage getting all the indications through. It's definitely better to go through the clerk, so whenever I'm doing anything in terms of my questioning as chair, just please go through the clerk, and then everyone's on the same page. I think we've possibly too many layers of complication make it difficult for everybody. So I'll just work on that basis from here on in. That moves us to item 7. It's a Ray's briefing on the outdoor learning research paper. So there's a briefing note from the committee clerk at page 89 and the outdoor education briefing paper at page 90, and that really was an outworking of our stakeholder event that we had around this. So I was saying this will be a fairly short briefing at this stage from Ray's, who are joining us online. Is that right?
Yes, Gillian's ready.
So
and I've a paper copy beside you of the clerk's brief, but it has in it all of the asks, just to refresh your memory on what it was that stakeholders wanted at the end of that.
So we'll bring Gillian Kane in, who is the research officer from Ray's, who prepared the report. Hi Gillian, good to have you with us. Just to briefly walk us through the paper, and then members can, if there are any questions, we can ask them, and then make any decisions on any actions that might be arising from that. So I'll bring you in now, Gillian, and apologies to have kept you waiting today.
Not a problem, and thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, audio's fine, thank you.
That's great. I said thanks very much again for having me here. I'm going to talk to the paper in your packs on outdoor education. And this paper was obviously commissioned by the committee, and it's to investigate the key issues for the hands-on delivery of the curriculum in green space to every school child in Northern Ireland at all ages. And it was on the back of the event that the committee hosted on the 19th of March, supported by the Northern Ireland Forest School Association. And the purpose of that event was to look at whether Northern Ireland needed an outdoor education strategy. An outdoor education school strategy is one of the solutions we need to help every pupil deal with technology, sedentarism, school anxiety and stress, especially for pupils with special education needs and mental health needs. And at this stage, I'd probably point out that since this paper was submitted to the committee, we've received more information from and another paper from the Northern Ireland Forest School Association. So I'll take a look at that and revise the paper where needs be and retable it to the committee. So to start off, it would be worthwhile looking at the definition of outdoor education, and there's quite a few in the literature. For example, the Institute of Outdoor Learning says that outdoor learning is an umbrella term for actively inclusive facilitated approaches that predominantly use activities and experiences in the outdoors, which lead to learning, increased health and well-being and environmental awareness. While learning through landscapes has a focus on a planned and purposeful approach that uses activities and resources to enhance learning, mental health and well-being and environmental awareness. And it expands a bit to say it can be done on-site and off-site. So there's other definitions in the paper, but they tend to revolve around the benefits of outdoor learning, the settings in which it takes place, and the approach. In fact, the UK Youth Organisation, in its outdoor learning policy document in 2023, has said that this complex and varying terminology actually does cause problems. And it says that increasing the understanding of what outdoor learning consists of and its value to young people would prompt significant benefits to both the general public and policymakers. So it's suggesting that all these various, would be good to land on a shared understanding of what outdoor learning actually is. So the rest of the paper considers the benefits of and the barriers to outdoor education, existing approaches to outdoor education in Northern Ireland, examples of practice elsewhere, and what the issues and impacts would be for Northern Ireland, particularly in the context of any potential strategy on outdoor education. So on page 10 of the paper, there's actually quite a lot of about the benefits in the paper, and they're probably quite well known to the committee. So I thought I'd focus on the diagram on page 10, and that was actually produced in a blog from one of my former Ray's colleagues, Alex Home, and it was based on his review of the existing literature, but also a visit to the Northern Ireland Forest Schools Association at Clandyboy. So it covers things like the impact on physical skills, social skills, concentration, connection, confidence, and knowledge as a summary of all the benefits of outdoor education. Addressing the barriers are probably slightly more important for any strategy. And again, to summarise the literature, they tend to focus on limited access to nature, lack of leadership support, and that might be at the school level or the system level, the lack of explicit links to the curriculum. Teacher confidence came up in quite a lot of the literature, a lack of professional qualifications relating to outdoor education, some parental attitudes and how to manage risks, and then finally funding was also a big issue. So at the statutory level in Northern Ireland, the CCAA does actively promote outdoor education at the preschool and foundation levels. For example, it produced a guide in 2022 to support teachers in this called Learning Outdoors in Preschool and Foundation Stage, and it explicitly states that the outdoor play area is one of the best possible learning environments. And it's also produced a range of other resources for growing for the future, which is designed to encourage Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 pupils to grow and cook their own food. And I think the CCA has confirmed this in correspondence with yourselves that there is no specific resources at Key Stage 3. So here the curriculum tends to be very focused on Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. The Education Authority runs centres such as the McGowan Field Centre and 6 other centres which facilitate and provide support for teachers and students in outdoor education programmes. And there are other executive departments and local councils are also involved. For example, DAERA provides a list of forest education programmes. Sport NI runs the Tollymore National Outdoor Centre, though it's been closed since last January before last as a result of Storm Owen. And there's a number of park-related initiatives that Belfast City Council organises. And in 2021, after the pandemic, the Inspectorate published a thematic review of outdoors education, and it found that there'd been a number of successes. So things like creative, well-planned responses by leaders in response to COVID-19 guidance, that children's engagement and enjoyment in learning through explorative play, the recognition of the benefits of outdoor learning from staff and leaders, particularly in relation to wellbeing and concentration, and more holistic approaches to planning across the preschool and foundation curriculum, and increased outdoor opportunities for children to engage in physical play. But it also noted a number of challenges, and these were the lack of staff training in preschools and primary schools, the lack of consistent approaches to monitoring and evaluation, challenges for schools with no covered areas or suitable clothing for children due to bad weather, and the lack of outdoor storage, amongst others. More recently, in February this year, the Minister for Education launched the Outdoor Learning Project in February 25, which was intended to allocate 4 million to schools by February 2025. And it had a number of objectives to increase the use of creative outdoor spaces, increase children's physical, mental health and wellbeing, and support schools to increase their motivation, engagement and esteem. And building capacity within the educational workforce was also one of the objectives of that programme. And in total, there was 93 nursery schools, 776 primary schools and 40 special schools received funding for that. For initial teacher training, Stranraer University College has now incorporated compulsory nature awareness in all its undergraduate and postgraduate teacher training. And it now has a new outdoor learning environmental facility, which is designed to prepare future teachers to lead the way in sustainability and climate education. And it explicitly states that one of the purposes of that is to help increase teacher confidence. And there's quite a few non-statutory organisations working in outdoor education as well here. Probably foremost amongst those is the Northern Ireland Forest School Association, which has supported outdoor education since 2008 and has accredited over 600 teachers with the Forest School Leader qualification and accredited 257 forest schools, and it's got a whole host of educational resources and research on its website, as well as a dedicated permanent site at Clandeboy Estate, which I think the committee have visited. And there's other organisations described in the paper, including Playboard and I, for example. So, looking for, examples elsewhere. We've provided examples in the pack from Scotland, England, Wales, and the Republic of Ireland. That isn't meant to be exhaustive at all, given the broad nature of outdoor education, the range of definitions, and the number of organisations involved. But it's to give an indication of some of the issues involved and some of the partnerships that are important. Started off with Scotland, as it seems to be more or less universally recognised as being at the forefront of outdoor education. And in 2010, it published its Curriculum for Excellence for Outdoor Learning with the following vision: that all children and young people participate in a range of progressive and creative outdoor learning experiences, which are clearly part of the curriculum. That schools and centres are providing regular, frequent, enjoyable and challenging opportunities for all children and young people to learn outdoors through their school career and beyond. And that teachers and educators embed outdoor learning in the curriculum so that learning in the outdoor environment becomes a reality for all children and young people. And in its introduction, it states clearly that education should be for any child in Scotland, and that it should provide opportunities for planned and quality outdoor learning experiences, and that there should be a partnership approach as well. And further on, it does emphasise that should be right up to the age of 18 and beyond for children and young people with additional needs. And in Scotland also in 2018, it published a national position statement on outdoor learning and play, which is very much grounded in the UNCRC. And the statement reads: "We will work together to embed playing and learning outdoors as an everyday activity, and we will celebrate it as a fundamental part of growing up in Scotland." And that has now been signed by 100 signatory organisations. And it was produced by the Coalition for Playing and Learning Outdoors. And the signatories commit to widening access to high quality, diverse green spaces, opening up more of a communal and publicly managed spaces for playing and learning outdoors, enhancing and enriching urban green space and built environments, empowering every adult involved in the lives of children and young people with the confidence, enthusiasm and skills to encourage and support them to play and learn outdoors, and to generate and share knowledge and evidence-based research. So, turning then to England, there's been obviously a number of initiatives about outdoor education. Under the previous Conservative government, the National Youth Guarantee, which was introduced in 2022, had a pledge for all young people to be given access to more activities, trips away from home and volunteering opportunities by 2025, backed by an investment of 560 million. It's not entirely clear where that pledge is now under the new government, but it has been subsumed into a wider programme. And in England, as in fact in Scotland, there's a private members' bill at the moment, which is a bill to require that every child be offered at least one outdoor education experience during primary school years and at least one such experience during secondary school years and for connected purposes. In the paper, you'll see that one of the most cited outdoor learning projects in England is the Natural Connections Project, which was a 4-year project which ran to 2016. And it's still cited quite frequently, probably because of the size of it. And it was funded by DEFRA, Natural England and Historic England, and delivered by Plymouth University. And it encompassed 125 primary, post-primary and special schools and 40,000 pupils. And it worked on a hub model with beacon schools who were experienced in outdoor learning and less experienced schools, which were cluster schools, and to help them develop their capacity, and with a real focus on involving leadership and promoting the sustainability of the project. And in the evaluation, it lists out the benefits for pupils, but I thought it was interesting also that it looked at the benefits for teachers, which they found benefits for teachers in terms of teaching practice, health and wellbeing, professional development, and job satisfaction as well. And there's a number of key recommendations there. So like the whole school has to be on board with outdoor learning, that there needs to be collaboration and networks with others outside the school, that not just going to forests or whatever, but making use of school grounds and local spaces, providing formal and informal CPE opportunities, and demonstrating and recording progress. In Wales, the new Welsh curriculum, dating from 2020, has a strong focus on outdoor learning, and it emphasises that learning outdoors can lead to high levels of wellbeing, confidence and engagement. And a recent research report in Wales highlights that the curriculum includes the notion of cynefin, which it explains as the idea of connecting people with a place where they belong and where they're encouraged and supported to engage with the environment around them. So it's linked not only to outdoor learning as a pedagogy, but as a legitimation of place-based identity. Another research report in Wales states that they looked at the data and the focus on outdoor education, but they found that the data still hints at how teachers do not believe outdoor learning can effectively cover all aspects of the curriculum and learning. This may be due to a lack of understanding of the term outdoor learning and how it can be used to effectively teach the curriculum, which aligns with what the inspectorate found here and what comes out in the rest of the literature. So probably an important issue to consider. In the Republic of Ireland, the main focus of state-based organised outdoor education is the centres run by the Education and Training Boards, which are open for all ages. And again, there's explicit, like here, the explicit mention of the outdoors as a learning environment in the new primary curriculum dating from 2023. And there are resources for outdoor learning provided by SchoolNet and the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment. And again, primarily for early years and primary education. There was an interesting example of two schools in Donegal, early learning schools, which cater for pupils up to the age of 12. And they do try to conduct all their lessons outside. And their website states that our children follow the same curriculum as other preschools and prepare for primary school in exactly the same way. The only difference is our tables are outside, and instead of blackboards, we use trees. And they have a focus on providing appropriate schoolwear. And the owner of the schools said in an interview that there is no such thing as bad weather, only inappropriate clothing. And clothing does come up as an issue in a lot of the research and does relate to funding as well. Again, research in Ireland suggests that it is important in Ireland, but could be more structured and embedded in the education system. And a paper published this year quotes a study from 2018, which describes a feature of Irish outdoor learning has been its haphazard and accidental development, devoid of strategic intervention by policymakers or institutions. So it would appear that Ireland and Northern Ireland would seem to be similar in terms of their focus on early years and primary level education, outdoor education, and probably not as strategic as Scotland. That's on a different end of the spectrum. So then looking at some of the issues relating to outdoor education in Northern Ireland coming from the previous research and experiences elsewhere. And the paper lays out 7, and these are culture and commitment, collaboration and partnership working, funding issues, the curriculum, teacher training and development, inclusive approaches, and the school estate. So many of the sources cited in the paper suggest that there needs to be a real commitment to the belief that outdoor learning is real learning for it to be successful. And that ties into the sort of ownership at all levels and support from leadership. And again, with multiple definitions of outdoor education, it could be useful to have a shared understanding of the meaning of outdoor education in Northern Ireland context, so that everyone is signed up to what it means and what it encompasses. The second point is around collaboration and partnership working. And some of the examples that are outlined in the paper have been dependent on cross-departmental or cross-agency and cross-sector collaboration. And as I mentioned, in Scotland, the National Position Statement has been signed by over 100 organisations. And in Northern Ireland, there's quite a few partnership approaches being undertaken with executive departments and government agencies and councils, as well as voluntary sector organisations such as the Forest School Association. And it may be that support in navigating the various organisations involved, maybe through a central website, could be useful for teachers and parents or carers. Funding issues are obviously important and have been identified in several sources as a potential barrier. And these can manifest in a number of ways, including staffing ratios. Are there sufficient teachers and other adults to support the activity? Transport. Can schools and students readily access suitable transport to access education off-site, particularly for more remote residential sites? Equipment. Are schools able to fund appropriate equipment and clothing for outdoor education? And for example, in England, there's various charities that are set up to provide schools with waterproof clothing and wellies, for example.
Gillian, can I just, unfortunately, just to cut in here, we have, unfortunately, our next witnesses are on a tight time scale for their evidence session, so we're a little bit up against it with time, and I wondered, would it be possible to move you on towards sort of recommendations and conclusions at this stage? We are unfortunately just a wee bit up against it with time, and I do apologise for having to cut across you.
Not at all. Yeah. I was just in the paper, but the other issues around the curriculum, training and development, and inclusive approaches in the school estate. So, to conclude, then, this paper is focused on the impacts and issues. There's a consensus in the literature that there's a huge number of benefits to do with outdoor education, and that the issues that could be considered in the development of the strategy would be culture and commitment, collaboration and partnership working, funding issues, the curriculum, teacher training and development, inclusive approaches, and the school estate. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gillian. I'm sorry to have had to cut you short. Just the time is against us here. I really appreciate the input that you've given around this issue of outdoor education, and I think it's also important to note the input of the Forest School, who'd been in touch with you separately, and we'll see maybe if that can lead to an updated report. And also we've had contact directly from the EA around their outdoor education provision, which the committee's had a briefing on informally. I don't have any questions at this stage. I think really the question is around whether we do want to progress towards a motion. Can I check with other members if they have any questions they want to raise at this stage?
No, Chair, that was a very comprehensive report from Gillian. I'd like to thank her for it.
Yeah,
I have no questions either.
Yeah. No, we do thank you for the time given to that, Gillian.
Likewise, thank you.
Okay, so in terms of, I don't think there are any other actions, so that is very much appreciated, Gillian. I think now that the discussion is really probably around whether or not we do want to progress with a committee motion on this. I don't know if members have any views. I mean, I think certainly there has been a lot of substantial stakeholder engagement on this. I think there is an appetite for this, and I would be keen to maybe task the clerk with coming back with a draft wording of a motion around the need for an outdoor education strategy for Northern Ireland. A lot of that will be drawn out of the research paper before us. Are members in agreement, or are there any other comments or suggestions anyone wants to make?
Happy to agree with that course of action, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. I think Michelle,
you
indicated.
Happy to agree with that. I just wanted to flag, this has been raised with me recently actually by a teacher, the outdoor learning aspect, and I wonder if it would be worth getting, is it Chris Poots? I'm going to get his name wrong, Brian Poots, is it? From the Forest Schools. In an informal briefing, I think there was concerns around, in terms of the new curriculum, that this maybe wasn't being captured in that work, and perhaps, and obviously we know there's a wealth of research. So if that was something people might thought would be helpful to understand that in that context, then I think that'd be good.
I certainly think that would be helpful. Very happy to invite the Forest School to an informal briefing, and we do have officials in on curriculum, or the task force in on curriculum soon, and I think where outdoor learning might fit in that review is really crucial, so that feels like a helpful suggestion as well. And any motion may well want to raise curriculum issues in terms of where it sits. So okay, well I think we're agreed on that. And Clark, do you want to speak to that at all? Or?
Yeah, no, the actions I had proposed were to maybe compile the resources into a publication to prepare a motion for debate. And I think Gillian's last paragraph was going to probably be the motion for debate, which is great. And to maybe invite stakeholders who engaged to come up and hear that debate in the House. So I've also noted to invite Brian for an informal meeting, and we can refer the material that we have to the curriculum review task force if members are content with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Agreed. Okay, that's
Thanks
great.
so
Well,
much.
Thank you again, Gillian, and we look forward to seeing the text of the motion, and we will go from there. Okay, that moves us on to item 8 on the agenda, which is an oral briefing from two SENCOs. So just while the witnesses come in, I refer members to the briefing note from the committee clerk, page 128, a briefing paper at page 130, results of a SENCO workload survey at page 131, and a copy of the SENCO's presentation at page 205. So I'll just let the witnesses come through, but I can let you know that we have Claire McGowan joining us today, who is a SENCO at Bloomfield Primary School, and Anita Stewart, who is a SENCO at Kilcooley Primary School. So you're both very welcome, and I apologise for the delay in getting you in front of committee, and I thank you for your patience in waiting for the evidence session to start. So your briefing paper was really comprehensive and really helpful. So I think there's probably no commentary from me. I'm happy just to hand over at this stage for any initial remarks or presentation you want to make. I think you provided a copy of the outline of that.
Sure.
If I could ask for up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move into question and answer. And I'm going to ask members to. I know that there is going to be significant interest in this item. Every single member here hears from SENCOs in their constituency, so there will undoubtedly be a lot of interest in it. But I would ask members to really try and be focused on their questions, so that we can get round everybody. So less preamble and more to the issues would be helpful if everybody could be on the same page with that. But I'll hand over to yourselves. I don't know, Claire, are you opening, or would it be Anita?
Yeah, well, I'll let Anita introduce herself.
Yeah, we just thought we'd introduce ourselves, if that's
Absolutely,
okay.
yeah.
So I'm in Kilcooley Primary School, which is situated in the heart of a large housing estate in Bangor. The main school consists of classes from nursery right up to P7, and then we have 9 specialist setting classes which cover SPS, SPL and SPSC, and currently we have 238 pupils on our roll, and 145 of those have additional needs, which or to statistic then 61% of the children have additional needs within the school setting. The main school opened in 1969, and then the specialist provision opened in September 2019 with myself, 1 classroom assistant and a handful of children, and today we have 9 settings with 84 pupils, 9 full-time teachers and 25 classroom assistants to manage. We are a nurturing school that provides every child with opportunities to grow, learn and thrive, and I've been teaching since 1993 and been in Kilcooley since 2012, and been a SENCO there for about 11 years, and I'm very privileged because I'm released in my role as a full-time SENCO.
Thank you so much for having us here today and for the invitation to speak to the committee, and we really appreciate it. I'm Claire McGowan. I've been SENCO for 14 years in total. Just over 3 of those have been in my current school, Bloomfield Primary in Bangor. We currently have 109 children on the SEN register, which is just over 25% of our school. 40 of those are at stage 3 with statements, 5 more going through statutory. We also have 2 specialist provisions for learning, for moderate learning difficulties. And as well as that, I'm the mum of an autistic child who has a statement, so I've been through this as a parent and have a vested interest myself. So today I was just going to touch a little bit on the role of the SENCO. So there's a definition of SENCO that we have here, which is very broad.
in its definition. I don't know who's moving on the slides. Perfect, thank you. And it brings out part of our role then can be implementing the SEN policy, liaising with parents, supporting teachers, maintaining the SEN register and liaising with external agencies. But I think all of us who do the job have noticed over the years that that role has become increasingly big and difficult to manage. If we go on to the next slide, you'll see the responsibilities there of SENCO, some of which that I've kind of pulled out from data and from talking to other people. In reality, our role is ever expanding and becoming more complex, with more and more added onto it. It feels almost by the week, never mind by the month or year. We're the go-to person for everybody. We are there for parents, for children, for staff, for EA, for people from SARS, from our external agencies, for health, from the local impact teams. We're everyone's go-to person. We are increasingly becoming a paperwork management role rather than working with children directly. We currently feel very in the dark about what lies ahead and how to navigate these new systemic changes that we're facing. We're the only staff who will be called to tribunal to give evidence, like a Sendus tribunal, for a decision that we didn't make, not to grant a statutory assessment for someone, yet we have to defend that. We feel a huge responsibility that we have to answer for decisions we haven't made while trying to maintain good relationships with everyone that we're involved with. So I did a little bit of a survey that I sent to SENCOs, and I got just over 200 responses in about 5 days. Their experience as SENCOs ranged from 1 month to someone who said, I've been SENCO since it was invented. I don't know what that is in years, but it was a lot. And from SENCO, a wide range of them, there were kind of 4 main things that were pulled out as to their greatest challenges. So increasing pressures on school to meet the needs of children with SEN, with dwindling budgets, less resources and little support from the EA. Increase in paperwork, which we all know and feel. Time management, juggling your role alongside teaching responsibilities, and we're seeing children in mainstream settings with increasingly complex needs. There were a lot of other challenges there as well. Being everyone's go-to person is a lot of pressure. We have long forms that we have to fill in from Allied Health. We don't get our views heard on new initiatives. Our opinions don't count, but yet we still have to run with it. With too many systems, with too many portals, with too many forms that we have to fill in and nothing streamlined. Workload is having a big impact on wellbeing. So part of this survey then, I'd asked a few different questions. How supported do you feel by the Education Authority in your role as SENCO? 78% reported feeling not very well or extremely not well supported by the EA, which is a bit of an awful statistic to hear, but that's the feeling out there. I wanted to present this with as much data as I could so that I'm not just one lone dissenting voice. I wanted to get a wee bit of information from whoever I could. Consequently, on the next slide, you'll see 76% have considered leaving the role as SENCO. We have a lot of very experienced SENCOs out there, and to lose a lot of them, you'd be losing a massive amount of experience that a school has. So I tried to then look at what has been the reason for this. We know that we are facing SEN transformation here with big changes ahead, which we all recognise is needed. We're working in a system that needs to be updated and reviewed and sorted out. Part of this transformation has included changes in SEN services, with our local impact teams being formed, and a new referral portal. These have contributed to mounting pressures felt by SENCOs. We've received conflicting information about SEN transformation, and when asked how well the EA have communicated new initiatives with SENCOs, 59% of them reported that information has been not well communicated. Often we're left with more questions than answers. Now we feel we're being thrown into a system that isn't fit for purpose. We're unsure of how to access the best support we can for our most vulnerable pupils. Graduated response framework feels to us a bit like a stalling tactic. This is what we've been doing for years, supporting children at all stages of the SEN register and those at whole school provision, putting in those provisions that every child needs. It feels like a rebranding of what we have always done, meet the needs of all our pupils, not just those with SEN. So looking at the request for involvement portal then, 18% indicated they found it extremely difficult and 52% saying it wasn't so easy. We have all encountered some difficulties with this portal. I've done 2 referrals this week, and we have tiny little boxes to fill in, and I'd ask us on one of them, please be as specific as possible in identifying all the SEN that this child has. And when I did it, I ran out of space. So we don't even have enough room to write in everything that we need to. With the portals crashing and us losing information, we often have to type it into a separate Word document and copy and paste because we can't see tiny little boxes. And it's not just a rage, it's too hard for us to use. We're limited to how much information we can give them. We're limited to file size. We're limited to how many files. Now, they have upped that this year from last year, which is good, which is appreciated. And that's at least something. We're getting inconsistent feedback with what's being offered. We're being offered advice and guidance without anyone laying eyes on these children, often after a lot of interventions that have been put in place by school at whole school or stage 1 level. We were promised that the educational psychologist would be removed as gatekeeper to these services, but in all honesty, it feels like it's been replaced with a brick wall. We're also told this is a temporary portal, and it also will be changed as time goes on. I think a big feeling with SENCOs, and certainly 83% felt that their professional judgment isn't being trusted in this process. We are having to provide massive amounts of information on children, and we aren't being trusted. In terms of the local impact teams then, when asked about what contact they've had with them, 74% of SENCOs have yet to receive information from their local impact team or know who their key contact is. We know it's early days, we know this is early on, but we need something to work towards here, and at the minute, we can't see it working. If these teams were only trained at the end of August, how can they be ready to launch at the start of September? It still seems that we are being referred to individual services. There's no multidisciplinary thinking here. We've been promised the team around the child. At the minute, it's the team around the paperwork. Very often the child isn't involved in most parts of this. Where there's no transparency as to what the moderation panel are looking at, their criteria, or even who they are. We've been told there's 3 pathways of support offered, but we're also told they don't like the 3 pathways language to be used, but in their guidance that they provided us with, they're entitled pathways. So that again is not our choosing. There's delays with support. We have our local impact teams that are not staffed equally among all the local impact teams. Our own has no early years person. If we're looking at early intervention, how can we do that without early years? Special schools have been left out completely. They're in the dark as to what they can access from these teams, and it's seemingly nothing at the minute. We're told that we have to contact Send Central. It's not mandatory, but it would look good if you phoned them first. A lot of it feels like stalling tactics. As well as that, the role of the educational psychologist is changing. We were previously on a time allocation model, and now that's changing where they're more advisory in their capacity. We can still refer children to them, but it actually now is ending up that we decide who has to be referred for statutory assessment. We are not educational psychologists. We are not trained to test children and see if they have a learning difficulty. That is beyond our training. We're worried the impact that will have if the EA come back and say no to these statutory assessments. Will we get the blame for not having given enough information or not having done enough? It's a really difficult position to be in. We were told that we would no longer need to fill out paperwork to talk to the educational psychologist. It would go through the RFI portal. We've since been sent another form to do. So we have to do the form to speak to the psychologist. Then we have to put all the information onto the portal as well, doubling our workload. You can see on the screen now, I asked what would they like the EA to know. And I think these are very clear. It's overwhelming workload. We're feeling isolation and lack of support. We need to be recognised and respected for what we do and how we do it. SENCOs are fixers, so we like to fix everything and try and get everything right. We've got excessive paperwork here, too many portals, too much repetition. We're all under time constraints and funding deficits. Not only that, but most of us are teaching SENCOs as well. We're trying to juggle our classroom responsibilities with everything that SENCO brings. And we're seeing a lot of mental health and burnout. I know a lot of the comments I've had are very emotive. It's killing us. It's an impossible job. I'm exhausted and overwhelmed. It's overwhelming to manage. We are professionals that can be trusted. Things must change. Someone even said, "Thank God I'm close to retirement." Not me, but someone else.
That's too young.
Yeah. We feel patronised, our professional judgment is in question. I'm actively seeking employment in other sectors. 76% of SENCOs said they are doing that right now. They don't feel that this role is sustainable. So I tried to go, what would help? We need time to do our role and to do it properly. We need streamlined systems and reduced paperwork. We need funding and recognition for our role. We are very much in a managerial capacity where we are working with everybody, but our pay on the time given to that doesn't reflect that. We need to be on a salary scale where we're recognised for our experience and what we bring to the role. It's still very much at the discretion of schools how they pay their SENCOs. Not everyone will be getting points awarded for the additional management and responsibilities. There needs to be some consistency within that. We need to look at non-teaching SENCO roles, especially for those schools like ours that have such a high level of need. We need to be trusted, we need to have professional autonomy, and we need consistency in communication. We need to be trusted with how to provide the best support for children that we can. So we're really happy to take any of your questions. That was a whistle-stop tour of SENCO, but we can elaborate more if there's anything you'd like to ask us.
Look, that is it's brilliant, and thank you so much for that. And look, your presentation was so comprehensive. But I think for a lot of members around the table, it will be very reflective of what they hear locally. And I know I really benefited from having a conversation with you previously, not in my role as chair of the committee, just to get a sense of what you were dealing with locally, and it's been so helpful. And we do thank you for your time. And we also know it's not easy when you are a working teacher or SENCO to put your head above the parapet to speak about these issues, because this is a public forum and we understand that. So I think it is really very much, and I hope you do understand, the committee appreciate your willingness to engage. But I think it is absolutely vital for us as a committee to really hear and understand the issues that you're dealing with, because if all we hear is from the EA's perspective of how things are operating, and all we have is anecdotes that we might hear locally, I think to actually have on the public record what some of the realities are is really, really important. So that in and of itself, we could probably finish the session now, and it would be useful, because when we come to hear from the EA, we have that bank of information you've given us. Look, you set out quite clearly actually what you thought the EA needs to be doing to support you better. That was going to be my first question. But I do think it is worth pointing out just what a bleak picture it is that is painted there of what is clearly a very dedicated workforce. But I've just pulled out some of those stats. When you combine the percentages, 78% saying they're not well supported, with only one individual saying they felt supported anyway. Yes. I mean, that's, you said about 200 responses?
Yeah, I had about 203, and I'm not a statistician. I just did this off my own bat and tried to get, I'm one of the admins for the Northern Ireland SENCOs Collaborate Facebook page. We have about 1,600 members. We use that forum to try and help each other, to try and support each other, because we're not getting the information that we need from EA. So, and we do it as our cluster group as well. We're a North Down cluster group, and we work really closely together. But we are just finding we have to do these things ourselves, because it's not being put in place for us. So we're trying to be proactive. I'm invested because I need this to work for my son. So I need to be able to say this for all the kids in my care as well.
No, look, it's clear that the commitment to the role, but certainly those stats don't make good reading, nor does the qualitative data that's in there around feeling overwhelmed and isolated and not recognised, respected, overloaded, burning out. I mean, these are not really
upsetting to read. Actually,
those are not words we want to hear about our teaching professionals. So I suppose then, I think your evidence, your written evidence and oral evidence around what you need to be supported is quite clear. I wanted to just really focus my question on the stage 2 process at the moment. There's a huge push from both the department and the EA that's where the emphasis needs to be, both at stage 1 and stage 2. And in fact, I think we've had the minister say something along the lines of that when a child is statement that it can represent a failure. I think there's actually, the minister has said that because the support hasn't gone in beforehand. So if that is the position that we're working from the department, we've got to be getting stage 1 and crucially stage 2 right when the school-based resources have run their course. Yeah. So can you give me a sense in that new system, the graduated response framework and the new request for involvement portal, and your engagement with the local impact teams, how would you describe the effectiveness of that process and the support that comes out at the other end of that. So really at that point you're engaging, moving a child on to stage 2 for more directed support. How would you characterise that?
We know we've put in a lot in place in our whole school and stage 1 provision already. We're fortunate to have learning support teachers in schools, so there's some children have had 2 years of learning support, nearly daily sessions, and when we're referring them on and they're coming back from our local impact team to say we'll give them maybe pathway 2, that's 6 hours of advisory support. What other advice do we need at that stage when we have ploughed all this time and effort into children and tried to give them intensive support and early support? That's not enough. I acknowledge that more needs to be done at stage 2 and maybe we wouldn't have to get to stage 3. But it's not enough to say that we've made local impact teams by combining services together. They're not combined. We are not getting a multidisciplinary approach here. We are still being signposted to individual services. And I am not in any way criticising the local impact teams themselves. They've been thrown into a system that isn't actually in place yet. This is painting by numbers. This is taking it one day as it goes. It would be absolutely fine if all that strategy had been looked at first to say this is what we want, this is our end goal, and this is how we're going to do it. There's no strategy. There's put people together in a team and say, away you go and decide what you're going to do. And that's what I think that's what I've been fed back from my local impact team staff members. They're not representing all areas of SEN within them. Like I said, we don't have any early years person. So at the minute I have a few children that are receiving some support, which is labelled intensive, which will be 12 weeks in nature. We don't really know what will come after that. We don't know if after 12 weeks they'll go, right, they're discharged and that's it, or what way they're going to do it. So we don't really know what that looks like, but I do know it's not what's been promised. It's not early intervention if you need to have a year of PLPs to show us your evidence. It's not early intervention if you don't have any early years people on your team. It's not early intervention if we have to have exhausted everything, but yet what you're giving us is less than what we're already doing.
Can I ask a question? So when we had the EA in, one of the officials giving evidence in that session took a wee bit of exception to the suggestion that there was any sort of mandatory requirement of how much evidence was required, and they said, look, everything's dealt with case by case, there's discretion and flexibility, but there was maybe a sense of we can't just take teachers' word for it either. So could you speak to that? I mean, it has been put to me that there is a mandatory requirement for a certain amount of evidence and a number of terms worth of evidence. Is that your experience?
Yeah, it's on the list. So here in the information that they've sent us, there's a list of what we need to make this referral. So this is from them. It's been updated this week actually, again. So have you contacted SEND Central Helpline? Have all the whole school and stage 1 reasonable purposeful measures been used? Have you spoken to the SENCO? Well, you'd have to because I'm the one that makes referrals. Have you accessed training? Have you consulted? And then it will say you need 2 evaluated PLPs. 2 reviewed PLPs with targets and interventions to date. Early years only require 1 if they're in nursery and they've only come to you. So generally for us, if we're on a 2 PLP cycle per year, that's a year. Now they will come back and say, well, you could shorten those PLP cycles and do it, and do it a bit sooner than that. But generally speaking, that's what our PLP cycles are. Either schools do them 2 a year or 3 per year, and that's there in black and white.
Okay. So I think it's important to get that on the record because there was pushback from the officials on that. And then when the support does come, is your concern you seem to be highlighting is that it tends to be advisory in nature first. When you've come through, I imagine, quite intensive stage 1 engagement at school level.
Last year I did a couple of referrals and it came back as saying we will give you advice and guidance. And at that stage I wasn't happy because these children had 2 years of learning support. I said we don't need advice and guidance. They need help here. And they're significantly behind in their literacy skills. Then I was told I'd have to cancel my last RFI, redo the whole thing again, and they sent me a ream of assessments to do with the child, literacy assessments. I had to spend a day with each doing the assessments, uploading all of those documents again. And by the way, when you upload one, you have to change it to a PDF. And when I uploaded them all in one go, it was too big to be accepted onto the portal. I had to cut them in half, redo it all again. So even though when you're questioning it, they're then giving you more hoops to jump through. Now, I've been lucky this year. I've literacy support out for a couple from the ones that I questioned last year, and I've got direct intervention. I've got behaviour support out for another, but again, this is not multidisciplinary. This is individual services.
Yeah,
Have you had the same?
Yes, we have behaviour support coming out, and that was continuation from last term into this, and again, that's a separate service. And then we have our own literacy support within school, which we're really lucky to have. But again, that's a financial cost as well. So, and then by the time you go through everything that you're doing, you feel like you have to create folders of all this evidence for each child, and you just feel the pressure that you're not. You don't have enough evidence, and then you worry, will I go through all of that referral process to be then turned down, and then you feel that failure within yourself.
It's team around the paperwork.
Yeah, look, I made a note of that phrase, you know, that this needs to be about the child, and it feels that it's about the process.
Judging us.
And I think I'll just finish with a comment, and then I'll open up to other members. It is through the multiple reviews around special educational needs up to now, it has consistently been highlighted that the EA was very system-led. It was about ensuring the system was followed and the processes were followed. And there's been widespread acknowledgement across DE and EA that needed to change. And it feels that something that was put in place that should have been more agile and responding to the child seems to have almost immediately got caught up in a process-driven approach to things. And I hope we are in an early days territory and we'll see improvement, but that is all really helpful. Look, I'm going to open up to other members here. I had Kathy indicated first there.
Thanks, Chair. I'll start off by saying, you mentioned, Clara, about being alone, not being a lone dissenting voice. I would say there are hundreds and hundreds of SENCOs cheering you on right now, watching this, and fair play to you both for coming in and doing it. I had to start out with that. I work quite closely with East Down SENCO cluster group as well, and everything that you're saying just rings so true to what they're saying to me. I want to just read something to you. I am feeling utterly disillusioned and frustrated by the current direction of travel by the EA. I would have been the first to agree that a complete transformation of our SEND was necessary, but just feel that we're ploughing ahead at an alarming rate with our local impact teams not fully functional, prepared or equipped, which in turn is overwhelming school teachers and SENCOs. Does that sound familiar?
I'd have written it myself. Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Well, then what I want to say, the response that I got then, whenever I raised this, was that's why we have a line in the delivery plan about looking at the role of SENCOs. Does that reassure you?
No.
In any way, shape or form?
No. They might listen, but they don't hear. That's how we feel. We're trying really hard. I've tried to engage with EA. I've tried to contact people at Send Transformation if I can keep up with who does what role on a particular day. I've sent the emails, and the only response I got was from Nick here. I've had no response from anyone else. Went to training a few weeks ago on graduated response framework, and you need to tell us what's going on, you need to tell us what's happening. I said, well, I've tried, and no one's replied to me, and no one's engaged. So what else are we supposed to do at this stage? We don't know where else to turn, really. So that's why we're here.
Yeah. Again, fair play to you both for that. I want to ask around you mentioned about the criteria for the pathways, for getting support in the pathways.
Yeah.
Have you any concept of what that criteria is to get a child onto pathway 3 or the one-to-one support?
No. We asked for clarity. There's a moderation panel.
Panel.
We don't know who's on it.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a moderation panel. The information goes to them. When I was at the day 2 there, graduated response framework, someone asked them directly who's on the moderation panel and what's their criteria, because we were sold local impact teams would have no criteria.
Yeah.
Where we had before literacy service, you had scores, autism, you needed the diagnosis, all the rest of it. So we were sold no criteria, but now there seems to be a lot of hidden criteria there, and we don't know what it is. So we were what they told us is pathway 1, your child would stay at stage 1 because it really is pre-RFI input that they're having in advice and guidance capacity. Basically, they're saying you haven't filled in your form well enough or you haven't done enough. Pathway 2, we're told then, is 6 hours of partnered support, which may include some observation or a bit of assessment with the child, and then they will give you some things to do, advice after that. Pathway 3, our intensive support, is 12 weeks of support with a child, and we don't really yet know what comes after that. So again, we've asked for clarity around that. Now they've said we don't have to do 2 more PLP cycles at the end of that, but I still don't know whether that means we then have to do another RFI. So we then will have to do another RFI and say we've tried what you said,
Okay.
and it's still not working.
Okay.
That's my understanding. I don't know if you think any different.
So basically, you're doing these referrals blind. You're not knowing you don't know what evidence, you don't know what it is that you're trying to put forward here.
We're not
decided to put as much evidence as possible.
But we're not all on an even playing field with what we can provide at stage 1. So we're fortunate to have learning support teachers within school. Not all schools have that.
Yeah.
So why should that go against you as not being able to do it because you don't actually have that within your provision?
Yeah.
Our provision maps are not all the same.
Yeah.
What we can do at stage 1 isn't what another school can do at stage 1. And why then should you be penalised on what you can get at stage 2 because of that?
Yeah. There's hundreds of questions I could ask you here, literally, but we've heard from SENCOs. We've also heard from members within these lit teams as well. And you raised it there at how they're feeling, feeling like they're on the firing line. They're the ones that have to come in to schools and face it when they're not aware of what's going on either. And there seems to be a suspicion that the aim of this is to look like there are lots of referrals, there are lots of children on these pathways, but maybe in reality there's not as many getting support at the end of that. Would you agree with that?
It's certainly, yes. It's hard to tell at this stage because it's so new to us. But even from what I'm seeing now, isn't majorly different from what we had before. So we were promised multidisciplinary thinking. I asked it at the graduated response day as well. You know, we talked about, we have this now key contact from our local impact team. I asked my key contact, what's your role? He says, don't really know yet. When we go to RISE, we have a key contact with them, so they're multidisciplinary support from the Health Trust. And we have a consultation model. So we discuss with them, we raise some children, and they might say, right, you know what, we'll do a small group support with this lot. We'll come in and do whole class with this. And then they lay eyes on the children before they say, oh, do you know what, refer them. They could do with X, Y, and Z, which is a really good model. So I asked about it at the graduated response day. And apparently that's what we're working towards. Why we're not starting like that then? Why we're starting one way and then changing to another? And why is that not being communicated to us? That this is what we want to go towards.
That model works.
That model does work, and you have a relationship with that key contact who knows your school, knows your demographic, knows what you have in place for those children.
And
probably a good point just to finish, I think, on that.
This is literally a one word answer we'll do in this as well. I am constantly told that the removal of the educational psychologists is removing the workload, helping the workload of the SENCO. Do you agree with that?
Doubling it.
Thank you.
Perhaps we can maybe pick that up with other questions, because I think it would be good to have some evidence around that in terms of when we engage with the EA. Michelle, you had indicated next.
I'm like Kathy, it's like, whoa, where do you start? Thank you for coming in. I think I want to echo that. You're giving us evidence from the front line, and that's what we need. I think we've struggled to get clear answers from officials, consistent answers even from officials, so this is really, really helpful. I'm just going to start with early years. You've mentioned it, it's something I have an interest in. I picked it up with officials myself. My sense is, and you've explained the logic, and maybe you could just expand on that, early intervention requires early intervention. It needs personnel in those early year slots. My understanding is there are massive gaps there. That's what you're hearing. And can you speak to just exactly the necessity for that? Because I'm assuming then you're in a primary school. When a child comes in from a preschool setting or early years, you need to have information to meet their needs. So can you just expand on why that's important and what your experience is right now?
We both have nurseries as well.
Yeah.
So we get them from straight away, and that's when we need this process to start. We need it to start in nursery. And our nursery teacher has rung Send Central to say, I need help in this nursery. We have children with increasingly complex needs. These are our COVID babies. These are our children that have not met their milestones, have missed out on a lot of their childhood experiences. And I said, ask them, do they even have an early years person can come out to the setting and see it and make suggestions generally. But we're told our team doesn't have any early years, but we're told there will be early years local impact teams being formed that specialise in early years.
Right.
But I don't know when. Have you heard anything about early years?
I only found my lit contact on Friday,
yes.
so I haven't had any other conversation around that. But the needs coming in at that nursery level are so high, and it's speech and language is a really big issue for a lot of those children, and you can, if you can get that support in early for those children that are just missing some blocks, or they can be supported at that early stage. We're lucky that we also have a nurture room in our school that gears towards our P1s, 2s as well, to try and put some more early intervention in for those children. But accessing it, I'm not sure how I'm going to access it through,
we don't know
through the lit teams.
We all acknowledge this is early days, but it feels like that's such a priority to get right, and those are the gaps we shouldn't have.
Yeah, we can't stall now.
Yeah,
we've been told to ring Send Central for general advice, and then I've been told to try and make our RFI for those children before I can consult with psychology. Right. But we know for our nursery children that there are some of those who will need specialist provisions or who will need special school, and that is our time to get it. Yeah. So we don't get that ready for P1. How are they going to get a place any other year down the line?
Keep going on the educational psychologist then, and where the picture is now. I'll make it open for you. You tell me what the experience is like now. What has changed? What hasn't changed? Is it working? Could it work?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate in that I have a great working relationship with our educational psychologist, and that's key. The way it would be for your key contact for your local impact team. You need a person who's going to advocate for your school, who knows your demographic and what you need. So my understanding of these changes then is that they will no longer recommend a statutory assessment for a child. So if we refer a child to them and they assess, their report will no longer say, we recommend you request a statutory assessment. That is now up to us to decide whether we do it. And we don't need to have them assessed by an educational psychologist before we make that referral. Now, again, this is where we don't know what the panel who decide to say yes or no to the statutory assessment referral, what do they want from us exactly? They obviously want a mountain of information, but we haven't been used to doing that ourselves without the educational.
Change.
It's a big change. Without the psychologist giving you the okay to do that. And we knew that when a psychologist wrote that in the report, this is what they need, we'd get it. So if we no longer have that security, how are we going to guarantee that any of our statutory assessment referrals get through? And not only that, if and when they say no, who's going to get the blame? It's going to be us. And it'll be put maybe to parents that they didn't provide enough information, they didn't do enough for the child, and that's us then having to face that. So this is very new, we don't know where that's going, but this is what we've been told.
And your educational psychologists, how do they feel about these changes? I mean, you have a good relationship, have you discussed this?
Yes, and they want to see, I suppose, they have felt that their role is changing to very much a statutory role where all their work goes on statutory assessments, and that's everything they had to do. So they call it now, they're telling, sorry, I have paper everywhere, to this direct psychological consultation, DPC, where they want to work in collaboration with parents, with schools, with young people, to maybe meet together for these solution-focused meetings where they suggest some things to do that you go away for a period and try them, rather than just being a service that assesses and advises and writes reports. I think that's what they're aiming for. But our difficulty is we have such complex needs. If we feel a child needs like a move to a specialist provision, or a move to a special school or something like that, we now have to decide that statutory assessment needs to go to get that, if you know what I mean. And
I don't have that training.
No, I don't have that training.
It's all supposed to be child-centred. That doesn't feel like the interests of the child.
Maybe just final comment from Michelle.
So it's very new. It's brand new. We were told there wouldn't be a consultation forum as such to do, and yet when we had my meeting, here's the forum now to write down everything that we've discussed and then go and do an RFI after that. So I wanted to just write in the RFIC consultation form. I didn't have the nerve. I chickened out in case it meant that my child didn't get what they needed. So you feel the pressure from that. You know, I'm an outspoken person, but even I was scared of that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, that's great. And look, ordinarily I bring the deputy chair in first. I inadvertently promoted Kathy to that role today. Card was marked, no doubt. But Pat's happy to come in at the end. I'm going to bring Danny in now. So.
Chair, thank you so much. This is what's so important about us holding a SEN inquiry, and we get to hear exactly what's happening on the ground, because Kathy was raising everything she's raised today and what you have said just last number of weeks, and we had Richard Pangeli, who's the CEO, in front of us, and one of his replies back to when Kathy saying, "Are you listening to the SENCOs?" was basically, "Are you listening to the EA?" You know, really, for me, I thought they just weren't getting it, and we're just listening to these they jump through hoops. Like, that's telling me that they're deliberately putting up obstacles to stop support going to our children. It feels, that's what it's feeling like, and that's what it's sounding like from the evidence that you have given today, which is so important. Can I ask, just because, see, if you're trying to get your child support a statement, how many referrals can a school do roughly? Is it limited?
It was limited in previous. We would have had set psychology hours, which generally equated to me to having 3 children a year. The nursery was in a different, because it's not formal education. You could push the nursery ones on top of your. But as far as I'm aware, there's no limit.
No, I think you can continually make a statutory assessment referral, and they have time. You know, they have to go away and look at it, and it's the same with the parent referral. You know, parents can continue to do that, and that will keep going. And you know what? I can't say anything against that because I did it myself.
Yeah, and
so I will always encourage parents to advocate for their
and that's what I was going to get to, because it was about the tribunals and how many then end up in tribunal, and then the EA have to then sort of step back. But when we were sort of asking of the EA as well, they were sort of saying, well, it's really the parents' fault, they're not giving us enough information. So that's why I was trying to add info. Like, is that going back on to use as well for that info?
The school also provides information
we also were asked.
for parent referrals as well. So the school does supply. It's not just the parent.
No, it's not just the parents.
So it will come from both.
Yeah.
From both. So again, extra workload. Back onto yourselves.
If it does come to tribunal, then their legal representatives will be in touch with us. Very often it involves then a freedom of information request, but then we have to gather everything on that child and send it off. And then the EA will come and say, you know, basically, do you think we should give in to this or not, you know? And we'll give our tuppence worth for whatever it's worth. But I understand why that's what parents feel they need, because what's the alternative? 12 weeks of support for their child. That's no alternative. That's no substitute. I mean, they hold up classroom assistant as the gold standard. That's the minister's own words. But it's not. It's what you feel is your only option. That's all you can get. And that's what I felt as a parent. That's what my child needed, because what was the alternative?
I could just take it a slight different direction, and it's around the SPIMS. And it was just at the weekend, a teacher reached out to me, and just like, they are doing their utmost, as what you are as well on the front line of it. But she has 5 different year groups in the one class, and just said she's a breaking point, and how can she teach a P5, which I think of my own kid, the way he behaves at P5, to then a child who would be P1 who'd be learning rhymes, and like how is that child centred?
One with significant deficits, you know, so not at P1 level. I mean, Anita has 9.
Yeah, well, we will have rooms with my Learn Sport has P1 to 4 in the one room, and my second Learn Sport, which is a pathway for the older children, has P5 to 7 in the room. Our area is very much the difficulty and the need is in social communication, and so I have several of those rooms now. I do happen to have a straight P3 room. We've had to take extra in there. I have a straight P6 room, but I also then have a P5, 6, 7 room and a P1 to 4 room. So it is very difficult to manage, and they do get 60 hours classroom support within those settings, so you do have 2 full-time assistants, but it is very much about managing the different needs of all of those children.
Yeah.
And I having taught it myself, I taught in the learning for a number of years, and I had, and when we first opened, I had P3 to 6 in the one room, and then it went to P5 to 7, and then I went into the P1 to 4 room. So it is, and I like composite classes. I come from a composite class background, you know, and I think there are benefits to have from that, but I also know the workload is much more intense, and it is hard for some of those P1s who are settling, and then there are P4s who are settled, and it's about dividing your time. It is really.
And if you don't
difficult.
have a
comment, Donnie.
Oh, sorry, it would be like if you don't have the breakout room, because she was explaining to me as well, like when one child maybe kicks off, or way to describe it, but then all the children are having to go into the corridor.
It just depends on the profile of the child as to whether they will. If we have safe spaces throughout our school for different children, but not all of them choose or want to go there, and they may choose to go there when they're regulated. But quite often it is about removing the children and letting the other child settle. And
we know there's a big,
just very briefly to finish.
There's big deficits within social communication specialist provisions.
Very much. So.
Ours are learning, and we have 4 in one and 6 in the other. We've space. But we've children sitting waiting for years on space for specialist provisions for social communication. So they need to look at what the need is and match the provision to go with that.
Thank you. That's good. Thank you.
All right, you were next there.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you both for taking the time to share your lived experience and obviously your professional experience, and I very, very much value the information you provided as well from others who have responded. I think it's particularly concerning, Chairs, if you've said, looking at the fact that 3 out of 4 consider leaving the role. I think that's deeply alarming, and certainly when you read the comments and the feedback, you can't help but actually be moved by the clear stress that people are under. So that's a concern. One of the key issues that seems to be raised time and time again, not just from yourselves but also from those parents, is around the issue of communication and that sort of frustration. One of the comments was that they find out more from the Facebook page than they do sometimes from EA. Can you maybe speak a bit to in terms of when they say that, what types of information, there was a mention of a postcode lottery, what types of information are people struggling to get that they would get from the Facebook page and not get from EA?
Yeah, I think even in terms of what the local impact teams are going to provide. So I know certainly there's been a lot of talk of the pathways on the Facebook page and what actually that support looks like on the ground, because not everyone's having the same experience. I think our concern with it is we've moved away from a 5-board area where everyone was doing their own thing. But now are we coming back into that where every local impact team is now going to be doing their own thing and providing their own support? So I think that enables us to see what is going on in the whole country and not just in our own local impact team. So it's given us a wee bit of breadth to see what's going on around us by being able to communicate in those different forums and those different ways. But I suppose the difficulty is when we go on those pages, so-and-so will say, well, I was told this. Someone else will say, well, actually, I was told this. Oh, well, do you know what? My local impact team keep in contact. They said this. Yes, and even within if we're on different local impact teams, we're all being fed different information. So that's where we see lack of consistency.
Yeah, and in terms of the new initiatives, obviously, there was concern around the communication of those. Did I hear you right when you said that in terms of your involvement in those new initiatives and the design and obviously the LITs are obviously very new. What was your input into those? Nothing? You haven't had any?
I think they have working focus groups, but I don't know who gets on them, but it's definitely not me. No, and when we have information sessions with the EA, it's cameras off, mics off and text box. You're allowed to type in some answers or some comments. So I normally have my comments and questions ready so I can copy and paste them straight in and get them in there. But they're very much hand-picked what's going to be answered or not. Last year we had big queries around when we could re-refer a child for support. So we would have had I had a report discharging a child from the literacy service. On the bottom it said, we will need 2 reviewed PLPs before you can re-refer this child. Then on the SEND transformation, no, you don't need that. You just re-refer them straight away. So there's immediately, I said that is not true. We have been told this. I ignored, nope, you just re-refer them. So I copy and pasted the bit off the bottom of the report, popped it in the text box, but it wasn't answered. So there's immediately contradictory information.
Just a final question, because a lot has been covered. Claire, you have said in your briefing that you've been a SENCO for 14 years. Obviously, we hear, and there's serious problems. Has there been anything positive in terms of change that you have seen in those 14 years that would make, I suppose, a positive difference?
I think the intentions of the local impact teams are good. I would love to see it moving to a multidisciplinary working. I don't have any arguments with any of that. I think amazing, brilliant. We are more and more complex children now who don't, you weren't allowed to be autistic and dyslexic before. You weren't allowed to have the autism service and the literacy service. So we need that multidisciplinary thinking for our more complex children. But those systems are not in place. So we're being promised all of this, and I have been on parent information sessions where this has been promised. They've been told there'll be no long waiting lists anymore, they'll get more support. They were pushing these group supports, for children that will take them out in groups and will do lots of multidisciplinary work. There's hardly a mention of a group support in any of this. So the intention's absolutely 100%. None of us are going to argue with that. It's not having the support system-wide to manage that, or the recruitment, or the retention of staff who are skilled in those different areas. That's the concern.
I do have to say I feel really supported by my education psychologist.
Yeah, me too.
I've been lucky to have her for a few years now, because there was a stage where you didn't know who your education psychologist was, and it was hard to get in contact. I have a really great working relationship with her. My statementing officer has been amazing, and for a while there I had a lot of different statementing officers, and now I have the one. She has been to our setting, she knows what we're about, she understands our setting, and she will be there for me. I tend to weigh heavily on those two people as well. I have a great senior management team to depend on too, but it should be coming for the children. Yes. We're in this job because our hearts are with those children, and when you have parents sitting in front of you that just are at their wits' end, and do you know what? I keep a box of tissues on my table, and it's not me making them cry, but it's
me needing them too.
It's heartbreaking, and I appreciate that the EA are making those steps, and I think as you said, the intention is there, and they do want the children to receive this support, but I think the strategy needs to have been thought out much better before
you launched into it.
It just feels a little bit of a reactive response to the situation in the nation currently.
Everything's relationships based. We have relationships with our psychologist, with our local impact team staff. You have all those relationships in place. That's your foundations, but we need the system to support that.
Thank you. Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you, Gary. And look, I think we are up against it in terms of time, but this is really crucial evidence. So I'm not going to cut anything that you have to say to us today short, because I think it is really, really important. Maybe just an observation quickly just before I bring John in. One of the things that's been a slight concern for me is that there's a lot going on in the transformation space, and we're hoping to hear from the department soon to really help us try and break down what really is happening and what are the priority actions. But the local impact teams seem to have been the kind of headline. This is where we're going in. Is there a risk, do you think, in terms of, and I'm happy just with a yes or no answer or a very short answer, is there a risk in terms of confidence in the transformation agenda if this first sort of headline action isn't delivered and resourced effectively? And I want to be clear, because there was a bit of a suggestion from the EA we were having a pop at their staff. Really not. No. I have no doubt there are really, really dedicated people behind that label of local impact team who want to deliver, but feels the structures maybe aren't quite there. So do you have a concern just around the confidence in the system about the transformation?
Yes, I would be concerned at that. And again, we're not blaming our local impact teams for that. We need to work with them. Yes. We are supporting them. We're behind them 100%. It's the system. It is. We need a system in place for them to work in.
That's great. John, I'll bring you in next.
Yeah, thanks for that. It was really, really enlightening, as was the report, which I thought was very good. I was two things. The first, very, very quickly, was just on the impact Storm Amy disruption has on SEN children. That sort of late notice of schools closing, and just how that has a particular impact, because I have asked the Education Authority to look at faster, more agile ways of communicating. But the second one is, suppose the big one is around admin. I sort of see, it's like cholesterol, there's good and bad, and we do need admin, we do need records for transparency and for an audit trail. But it seems you're saying there's too much. I mean, what is the solution to that? Do you have any practical solutions in terms of, is it a need for more admin support? Or are there actually duplications that could be better managed? Is there streamlining? Is there stuff that can just be taken out of it? Are we over-recording for risk aversion? Is there something concrete we can actually just recommend to the Minister and ask the Minister next week to improve on the admin?
We need one portal to go to. We don't need 5. So if we have information held centrally on one portal, then that we can take to for whatever referrals we need to make. Instead, we have one for RFI, we've one for annual reviews, we've one for making statutory assessment referrals, we've SIMS where we have our pupil data recorded on, we have a SENCO portal where we go to get our information. So there's 5 already, 5 logins, 5 interfaces, 5 different usernames you have to remember. We need one, and thank goodness passwords can save on your computer, or else I wouldn't have a clue. So that all needs streamlined. We're told that EA Connect will be doing that in the future, that everything will be going to there. We were told that the statutory assessment referral portal will be going on to EA Connect, where we do our annual reviews. So we have been told they're hoping to do that. But very often, like for example, when we get the child to statutory assessment, we'll have had to make referral to RFI, we'll have had to consult with psychology, we'll have to make a referral to them, we'll have to make a referral to the statutory assessment portal, we will then have to fill in information on it, taken from everything else. If the statutory assessment is agreed, we then have to write educational advice. All of that is for one child receiving a statement. And all of that, all along the way, is the same information asked in a slightly different way.
Yeah, slightly different questions, but really the information is very, very similar, and it is frustrating, because I don't know about you, but I have to go in over the summer to keep up with a lot of this paperwork, and I had 11 consultations over July and August. I had education advice for the RFI that I put in June that I had to then do in July. I had to phone teachers, to try and get that information. So if that was streamlined, and then having recently just calendar scheduled all my P7 annual reviews. It's not difficult, and then it is a really easy way on that EA Connect. I enjoy using that. But again, if there was an admin, because it's opening SIMs, it's transferring information. And to me, if there was some sort of
central
admin
way. Now we're told that Bromcom is coming. We don't know when and what that's going to look like. But if we had something that Bromcom could feed in that information that is held on there with all the pupils' details, SEN, blah blah blah. If they had all that went straight in, well, that's going to save us a lot of work straight away. But those systems, now some of the annual review stuff will be populated, but there's others that isn't, and even if you've done it last year, it might not come up again this year.
That was really useful. Could you write to me offline, just even exchange emails? I'd just like to follow that up, because it's something I'd really like to get my teeth into.
Right, all the portals?
And what we could do to try and improve this, just so I'm asking the right questions. And
it would be helpful for that to be shared with all members through the
100%.
That would be really helpful.
Sorry, I wasn't trying to.
John, genuinely, just for all members, the level of admin is a real big issue. Sorry, go ahead.
And I think to see it, I mean, I don't know if there's some way. I struggle to process all this unless, but I think sometimes if we actually can, I don't know if there's a way someone could, without revealing personal details of any child, but to say, look, here's just what this looks like, and here's what it could look like, would just be really beneficial.
I did it as part of staff training this year as well, to give them an insight into our role, and I just put a picture of each of the portals up there. This is what I need to do for this, for X, Y and Z, and it is useful to see that yourself and how that works or it doesn't work when they crash and you lose everything, and or things don't upload. Even today I had forgotten to upload one document on my RFI. I can't go back in and edit that. I have to then go to a contact form and say, I've forgotten this, can you please add this in? Sent the RFI number, can't see that RFI number. And they'll only come back to you within 10 working days. So we can't do that when we're asked for a form. So they came back to me the next day, thankfully. And I said, well, this is the number that they gave. Oh, sorry, this is a psychology one. We don't deal with that. You need to ring psychology to deal with that. So
Yeah.
even when you have a tiny thing that you need to do, like upload one more document, I don't know how many hours of work that'll involve.
I don't know what's planned, but I know the like of SIB, Strategic Investment Board, you know, the digital transformation team, they go in these things and just they run through it with the service users and come up with a solution that just works and test it. And I just think, you know, gripping this as a single issue would just lift a lot of work from you and actually let you get back to do more interactions with a child as opposed to managing admin.
One portal with different tabs, same user face, seems simple in this day and age.
We'll just draw that to a close there. I think that into that practical sort of detail of what this looks like, if that could be shared, I think would be really, really helpful. I think that is crucial because I think we all are sort of on the same page. But kind of a tell us once mentality would be really helpful to introduce here. If if there's one place to tell the EA, then they don't need to tell them again. Would be so helpful. Just looking for any other indications. I haven't got any at the moment, so. I think that's us. So the freshly demoted deputy chair has waited patiently.
Happy to wait.
I was. You've been very gracious, Pat. I did overlook to bring you in as usual, but the floor is yours.
And thanks very much for all the information you have given us today, and it reflects what we have been hearing from practitioners in our own areas and local schools and so on. And when the department and the EA had this big drive to open up specialist provision classes because there weren't enough spaces in special schools and so on. It was sold to us that there would be multidisciplinary teams. And, when a school needed support, the multidisciplinary team was there and the school would contact them and whatever type of support it was, whether it was speech and language or behaviour or social worker or whatever. And that would be there. Then the name was changed to local integrated teams, and when we asked the reason for the change in name, it said, it was just a matter of language. There was no real reason other than that. And then it was changed again to local impact teams, and those teams are now coterminous with the health trust. With the health trusts. So, and one of the issues we have is that there doesn't seem to be a great level of communication between education and health, whether it's the department or the EA and the health. What's your own experience in that?
None. There's none. Aside from Rise, who are from the Health Trust and work with us, it seems that EA, DE and health are all running in parallel and they never seem to meet. We were sold this as we would join with health. We would have them on board with us. Yeah. We would have access to services from them. We would streamline all those systems. But that isn't how it is. And we even have children then who are going through health assessments. We're sent long forms, 15, 16-page forms to fill in and send back to health. If a parent wants to go with concerns about autism or ADHD, we have to write a letter and outline what the concerns are. Health certainly don't provide us with any information that we ask for. So it seems they all are running in parallel and no joined up thinking at all. Then parents are coming back from appointments saying, well, the doctor told me that my child needs a statement now. This is just not the system that we're in, where we say your child now has a diagnosis of X, Y and Z and they get a statement, but that's what they're being told from health. So again, that's more pressure on us to say, when will my child's classroom assistant start? That's what I've been asked after an appointment. And you're going, my goodness, this is a really lengthy process with us gathering loads of information. So health don't even seem to be aware of what the processes are within education or what supports are available out there. Then we're having to answer the parents and manage those expectations to say, I'm really sorry, but there is no back door here into getting support. Or I've had one that came back and said, the paediatrician said my child's dyslexic. They don't test for that. They've looked at a few scores and that's been it. And then we're left having to try and pick up the pieces and work that out with the parent. It's undermining our relationships with them because it's making out that we're not doing what we should be doing when in fact they're describing something that doesn't exist.
So, apart from the admin difficulties that you have, there's a difficulty in accessing the appropriate support for children.
And And I know
we get some with our SPS setting, which are children with severe learning difficulties. So I have 3 of those rooms. So we do get, for those children, we are able to access support for specifically speech and language, who are amazing, and that we get that. And I would love to be able to transfer that to other children with those needs, but because they're in that
for
setting,
specific children,
it's geared towards specific. Now I understand that it'll be manpower, and I know they're stretched, but it would be great to, if they were on these lit teams and we are able to access their expertise, because they're experts in their area. It would be great if we could.
That would be the dream.
It would be the dream.
OT, physios, all the rest.
Yeah,
you know.
and that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, we've identified all sorts of problems. You have identified all sorts of problems. We've heard them from other sources as well. If you had a blank sheet of paper to design a system that would work, what would it look like?
We'd align health and education together. The children that we're getting in nursery and early years now haven't met their developmental milestones, and we can't put a pencil in their hand and say, right, you're ready to learn. Our children are not ready to learn. They need that multidisciplinary approach where we have physios on board. If they don't get their gross motor skills, they'll not get their fine motor skills. So we need a curriculum as well that reflects the children we're getting. So we need to look at those intensive supports in early years, developing all those basics, those motor skills, getting them out, learning to play, all of those things. So we need to transform our curriculum that actually is geared for the children that we have in our classroom now. And I know that is on the agenda somewhere down the line and what that'll look like. But to me, that needs to include that multidisciplinary thinking. So if we could, from early years, if we had OTs, physios, speech therapists that worked alongside our school, provided group supports, because we're relying on parents maybe to take children to speech and language appointments and they miss one and they're discharged.
This is the issue.
Or they're given 3 or 4 sessions and then they're on a break for 3 or 4 months and then they're reviewed again. We're getting children that can't communicate, and if you can't communicate, that's when we have behavioural issues, because there's frustration there. So we need to meet all of those needs before we can hand them a pencil and expect them to be ready to learn.
So fundamentally then, education and health need to be working closely together, to be collaborating and working to resolve all these problems that exist.
Really from birth.
Okay.
Yeah. And it must amaze you that at a strategic level they're not.
Yeah. Well,
It
it's what we were
amazes me anyway.
sold. We were sold that.
Yeah.
We were sold that we were aligning with the health trust areas because then we would all work together. But we've had no mention of health being involved in any of these local impact teams.
We have all been sold that.
Yeah.
We've been sold a pup.
And it would be great. It
It
really
would be.
would work. I mean, it
That
would
would
be
be
amazing.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
Well, thank you, Deputy Chair. Look, we have run over time, so I thank you for your patience and waiting to come and give evidence, but that has been incredibly helpful today. I mean, I don't think I'm overstating that on behalf of any members here. It has been so helpful to understand some of those realities on the front line, and I suppose it is just for me probably to finish with a thank you for the work you do every day in schools. I mean, it is noted clearly and appreciated in difficult circumstances, as the system at times must feel like it is working against you, meeting the needs of those children in front of you.
We've talked about us a lot, but it's the children ultimately that
Absolutely.
are missing out. You know, I know we've moaned an awful lot, but we want it ultimately for them.
And that's
Well, and I
why we
think that's
went
come
into
through.
teaching in the first place. I mean, you couldn't be in the education system if your heart wasn't with the children, and I think that's where a lot of the burnout and the frustration also comes from, because you see what you should be able to do and you could do, but you're only one person.
You're only one person, and you're trying to maintain those positive relationships with parents while breaking bad news that hasn't been of your making.
I think that's an appropriate place to finish. Nothing more for me to say or add, and we really do thank you for your time. Okay, so that brings us to the end of that evidence session. I'm going to suggest that largely we probably want to keep a very close eye on the Hansard report that comes back out of this, and to use that evidence in terms of the official when we have officials in from the EA and the department, particularly when we start to look in a bit more detail about the local impact teams and that a graduated response framework, all of that operational type material. I do think there is an issue around the funding for the local impact teams. I know when we had the EA in that the chief executive pushed back on that, and that that they tried to maybe suggest that you can't just solve a problem with money, but But if this is your flagship intervention, it needs to be resourced, and it's clear there's still gaps in those teams and clear system issues. I do want to put on record that I know EA staff are hugely stretched, and often behind those teams are teams that are expert and genuinely want to help reach out and meet the needs of the children that are being referred through. But it does feel that we have system blockages here that is preventing that from happening, and hopefully this inquiry can unpick that. Is there anything else anyone wants to add? Deputy Chair.
I just want to come in because, I mean, sometimes when you hear from people in different sectors and different roles, you wonder, is this just a disgruntled employee, or is there a problem, with one or two people? We're getting it from everywhere now. This is a dog's dinner, and if it isn't resolved quickly, it's going to create more problems in the long term. It needs to be fixed.
I think that is a really important point. I mean, I don't think anybody watching that session could say that's just the North Down Cluster Group's set of gripes. We all hear this locally. We know this is replicated wherever you're located, and I don't think that there's anything to be gained by hammering the point that that it's not working. But we need to be hearing something constructive back from the EA, and I think it's when we get pushback, when we're articulating the issues, that because the frustration then builds, and I think a bit of honesty around some of the realities of the challenges would be helpful to move things forward. Kathy?
Yeah, just a couple of things on that point. It really frustrates me when we are bringing these issues, and we are bringing genuine concerns to the EA. These are things that SENCOs, teachers, principals, parents are coming to us with, and we're trying to get genuine responses for them. And I now can tell over the period of time that you're just getting the wool pulled over your eyes constantly. And it just seems to be a trend that we're starting to see. The other thing is I wanted to raise is around the EA staff as well, and the lit teams, and that's something that really has come out very clearly, that they are the guys that are being pushed out to the cold face. They're the ones that are having to go into the schools and deliver news that they can't give a child a support, or that they have to go in and basically tell teachers how to do something that they've been maybe doing for 30 years and they feel really bad at doing it. So it's an important point that you raised there, that that's not what we're getting at. And I really didn't like when it was mentioned to me when I questioned leadership in the EA that that maybe EA staff would take offence to that, because that is certainly not where any of us were pointing it towards.
Well, I mean, I trust everyone around this table is concerned about ultimately building a system that works for the children. That's priority number one. But it has to work for all of the staff, whatever agency they work for, teachers, EA, and it seems we're not there yet. We are early days, so let's hope we're getting to this early enough that the issues that are being raised can be corrected. I think we have to be approaching this constructively as well. Dana, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I just think of all the evidence we've had over the last couple of weeks, it's been so vital to hear that today from Shane and Sen and I, because that is a cold face of it. I am also to the point, because we are coming from a good place, whether that was placements or whatever it is, was saying EA or DE officials are constantly coming in here, and Kathy's being a bit kind by saying they're pulling the wool over our eyes. They absolutely are. And we had our joint meeting with health in Middletown, and Pat always raised this around the lit teams and what was meant to be allied health professionals, or how many do we need. We raised it that day, and we were leaving. They actually pulled us to the side and says, why do you keep asking this question? We just don't get it. They don't. For the life of me, I can't understand what direction they're now going, because you're hearing it from the cold face of it. They're running parallel. They're not talking. And senior leadership need to come and take some responsibility here. They need, and see if they're not watching it today, that needs to be sent to them. They need to watch it.
Yeah, well, look, we obviously, you'll see in the forward work plan, we have multiple opportunities in the weeks ahead to really start interrogating that with the officials who are responsible for making the decisions in this space. I like to take a positive view in life, that nobody has malign intent and that everybody's working to the same goal, but something in the system, there's a blockage somewhere that the messages are not getting through. So we'll do what we can to try and unlock that. Is there anything else anyone wants to raise in terms of actions, or are we content that feeds into the evidence? content to move on. Okay, so next item then would have been item 9, end of session report, which is tabled for members, but I am going to carry that over to next week in the interest of time. It's not time sensitive, it just needs to be agreed for our end of session report from last year, so members will have the opportunity to read that in time for next week. That takes us to correspondence at item 10, and that's a summary note of that is available at page 217, so I will very quickly, we don't have a huge amount of correspondence this week, run through anything that requires a committee decision or discussion. Item 10.2 on page 218, it's a response from the Department of Education on linking generation NI's building an intergenerational NI proposal. The department indicate that it's not currently in a position to offer financial support to LGNI, but it will continue to engage with LGNI on its proposals. Item 10.4 on page 221 is then further correspondence from LGNI with an urgent update on its viability, which I imagine will come as a big disappointment to a lot of members for a work that does, an organisation that does work across all constituencies in really positive space, around the intergenerational work it delivers. So it's concerning to hear around those concerns about its future viability. I would really want to propose at this stage, we've been assured by the department they are directly reaching out to LGNI for a meeting. I would like to request from the department that we are updated on the outcome of that meeting, and also to seek clarification from the department around what cross-departmental engagement they're undertaking to see at a cross-executive department level what solutions can potentially be put in place to support this organisation, who really are the only organisation delivering intergenerational work across the departments. So just check with members if they're content with that proposal. And I would just want to send out a message, my own personal message of support, and hope the committee would be behind that for the organisation who've done some really, really great work and brilliant projects that they deliver. Item 10.3, page 219, it's a response from the Minister of Education regarding the withdrawal of transgender guidance for schools. Some of the things that I think that just raise a concern for me is still around. The Minister's clarified that the guidance where it previously applied to, and that includes youth settings and YOTUS settings as well as schools. I'm really keen to know now what is going to be put in its place, because there really is widespread uncertainty around this, and schools and pupils are navigating really quite complex situations and with the potential of real distress, impacts on non-attendance at school, which we've already discussed earlier today. And I would really like to see if we could maybe get some correspondence back to the Minister to get clarity on what is going to come in place of this, because there is reference to departmental policy, but that to me feels like a bit of a vacuum, whose schools need something practical and tangible, as do pupils. So really just want to seek committee agreement. We're content to go back with some questions for further clarity on that. Agreed. Item 10.5, page 222, it's correspondence from the Committee for Finance, and it's a report which aims to assess the extent to which departmental spending supports PFG priorities. Would members be content to note that for the upcoming budget briefing at committee? We agreed. Item 10.5, page 8 in your table papers, it's a research report on the state of primary science. I would propose that members that we note that and bear that in mind for our curriculum review meeting, which is scheduled. Are we agreed? Item 10.7, page 10 in your table papers is correspondence from an individual on private tutoring and some safeguarding concerns that were raised in terms of really there being no process by which a private tutor can access, get an enhanced access NI check to sort of verify their safeguarding, their status in that regard. And I think it has come from somebody who is providing private tutoring services, who's sort of raising this as their own concern. I have had some local contact on this issue previously, and certainly the feedback I've had is that an individual who is seeking to engage the services of a tutor can't be provided with the copy of an enhanced access NI check because of the huge amount of sensitive data that provides and the GDPR issues, and obviously that you can't entrust that to a private individual, and that really those requests for enhanced access NI checks are required to go through a registered organisation, such as the EA or a school directly. But I do think that a valid safeguarding point is being raised here around this, and I wondered whether at this stage we'd be content to raise share the correspondence with the department and possibly raise with them whether there is any work being done around a registration point for private tutors, and maybe a central point where those sort of access NI checks could be processed appropriately. Would members be in agreement with that? Great. And then item 10.8, it's correspondence from the department sharing the video on the GTCNI that was circulated with teachers. I think, Gary, you had asked for that. I would propose we note, or we agreed? Great. Other than that, are members content to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 217? Is that agreed?
Sure, just before you move on from that,
yes.
in reference to the letter from the minister in
Yes.
regard to transgender kids, and I have received a letter from a parent who has received a letter from the school, and I'm sure you've probably received the same letter, that the school's required to review and amend the current support plan in place for this young person. And I mean, I would be very worried about the impact on the mental health of that child and what's going to happen, because I know when some of the unions were in, they said that schools would continue to do what they had always done in terms of supporting children who are transitioning. But I mean, I can't overstate the seriousness of this. I think it might affect only a small number of children, but these are children who are already vulnerable because of the situation they're in, and this is going to add to that. So I don't have an action for you, but I think it's important that we raise it and that it gets mentioned here at this committee.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and I think that's why I suggested that to go back to the department, because I think we've created a vacuum and we don't know what that's going to be filled with, and it's just that concern around, as you say, young people who could be already feeling very vulnerable in the positions they're in. So
if only schools responded in the same way to the guidance on school uniforms, maybe we wouldn't have needed a uniform bill. Well, there you go.
Members. So item 11 then is the forward work programme. So I'd refer you to page 13 of your tabled papers. I would ordinarily bring the clerk in to speak, but in the interest of time, I think it does speak for itself. It is well populated in terms of the inquiry. I would just make one point. We're still just trying to iron out when we are getting the department in to speak to the SEN transformation agenda. I think myself and the Deputy Chair are scheduled to meet with officials next week to maybe address some queries they have about the nature of the evidence that we're seeking to hear from them. So I would hope at our meeting next week we'd have some clarity on that. And I would suggest then at that point, once we're clear on when we can get the department in and how many briefings they're providing to us, we can maybe get a clear sense of when we might want to draw a line under the inquiry. My position remains, if there's evidence we haven't heard that we still need to hear, we run it past Christmas because we need to hear the right evidence. But I don't think anybody wants to drag it out for longer than is needed if everyone's in agreement on that.
Have the department been furnished with our terms of reference? They have.
The understanding is that they have. So I'm not really sure what the uncertainty is.
No, I mean, if they've got the terms of reference, I mean, they should be able to work it out for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, we're asking them to speak to those four strands of right people, right place, right support, right time, which is in the department's own action plan. It seems to me a fairly clear ask, but I'm and also to speak to the transformation project specifically that they got that extra budget for. So, but you know, in the interest of ensuring we get the best evidence we can, very, very happy to meet with officials to provide any clarification that is required so that we can work with the department constructively to hear the evidence that we need. Other than that, are members content to endorse the forward work programme as drafted? Great. Item 12, any other business? No, that takes us to item 13, date, time and place of next meeting. That's scheduled for the 22nd of October 2025, 2 p.m, room 29 and online. Before we do that, I would just note we have the Minister attending at that meeting, so members may want to consider attending even 10-15 minutes earlier, just so that we're covering the areas the committee wants to cover with the Minister, and we're not doubling up on those questions. Okay, the question of the meeting does now adjourn. Are we agreed?
Great.